The radio crackled with static, then silence. Specialist Marcus Chun stared at the empty frequency where Sergeant Hawkins' voice should have been. 43 seconds of gunfire. Then nothing. Command's voice cut through the white noise with words that made Chin's hands go cold. He's gone. Extract in 6 hours. But Chun was already moving toward the armory, his hands steady despite never having fired a weapon outside the range. What they didn't know about the quiet intel analyst was that before he'd enlisted, before the Army had given him a desk and a security clearance, he'd spent 3 years in a place where survival meant being invisible and deadly in equal measure. The operations center at Forward Operating Base, Zephyr hummed with the usual controlled chaos. Screens flickered with drone footage, radio chatter overlapped in competing frequencies, and the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the Afghan heat. Chun sat at his terminal in the back corner, the spot he'd occupied for 2 years, the desk where everyone forgot he existed until they needed an intelligence assessment. Private First Class Amy Reeves rushed past his station, her face pale, clutching a tablet with trembling hands. She knocked a stack of classified reports off the edge of Chin's desk. Papers scattered across the concrete floor, red-top secret stamps visible to anyone walking by. A security violation that could end her career before it started. Chin was on his feet before she could react. His hand swept the documents into a pile, body positioned to block the view from the door where Captain Voss had just entered. Reeves looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. Chin shook his head slightly, slid the papers into a folder, and turned back to his screen as if nothing had happened. "Thank you," Reeves mouthed silently. Chin didn't respond. Couldn't. His attention had locked onto the mission report scrolling across his monitor. Squad ambushed, 12 kilometers northeast. Heavy contact. 1 Kia confirmed. Sergeant First Class Dale Hawkins. The name hit him like a punch to the chest. Hawkins. The only NCO in the entire company who'd ever treated Chun like he mattered. Who'd sat down at Chin's table in the DFAC when everyone else left the intel geek to eat alone. Who'd asked Chin's opinion on mission planning and actually listened to the answer. Who'd told Chin 3 months ago that he had the instincts of a soldier, not just an analyst, and that it was a waste keeping him behind a desk. Captain Voss's voice carried across the operations center, sharp and dismissive. Stand down on recovery operations. Asset is neutralized. We're not risking more personnel for a body retrieval in hostile territory. Focus on the living. Chun felt something dark and cold settle in his stomach. Asset. Hawkins wasn't an asset. He was a husband to Michelle, father to 2 little girls who sent him drawings that he'd taped above his bunk. He was the man who'd covered Chin's guard duty last month when Chin had food poisoning. The man who'd never once made a joke about Chin's size or called him a POG like everyone else did. Lieutenant Okonkwo stepped forward, her voice measured but firm. "Sir, we have positive confirmation of hostile activity in the area. Enemy forces are likely securing the location. If we wait 6 hours, we follow protocol," Voss cut her off. "I'm not authorizing a rescue mission that puts more of my soldiers at risk." Hawkins knew the dangers. We all do. This conversation is over. Chin's fingers moved across his keyboard, pulling up satellite imagery of the ambush site. His eyes tracked the terrain, calculating approach vectors, identifying cover positions, marking probable enemy locations. The analytical part of his brain operated on autopilot, the same way it had since he was 19 and learning to survive in Oakland's underground fighting circuit. Size up the threat. Find the weakness. Execute before they see you coming. "Chin, what are you doing?" Reeves had moved to his shoulder, staring at his screen. "My job," Chin said quietly. "Gathering intelligence. On a closed mission?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. Voss said a lot of things." Chin opened another window, accessing radio intercept logs. His Pashto was basic, but enough to catch the chatter. The Taliban fighters at the ambush site were celebrating, talking about a prize. A prisoner. Chin's pulse jumped. Prisoners meant alive. Alive meant time. Time meant possibility. He stood up so fast his chair rolled backward into Reeves. "I need to use the latrine," he announced to no one in particular, already moving toward the door. The heat outside hit like a physical wall, but Chen barely noticed. His mind was racing through calculations. Distance to target, 12 kilometers. Terrain, mountainous, multiple approaches. Enemy force, estimated 15 to 20 fighters based on intercept chatter. Extraction timeline, unknown, but the Taliban would move Hawkins soon, either to a secondary location or to make an example of him. Chen's feet carried him toward the armory without conscious decision. Staff Sergeant Morrison looked up from the weapons rack he was inventorying, surprise crossing his weathered face. "Chun, don't usually see you down here unless it's for quarterly qualifications. Need to check out a rifle," Chun said. "M4 carbine. Full loadout." Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "You running a convoy I don't know about?" "Personal request." "Personal." Morrison set down his clipboard. "Son, I've been doing this job for 11 years. I know what personal means, and it usually means someone's about to do something stupid. What's this about?" Chun met his eyes. "Sergeant Hawkins." Understanding flickered across Morrison's face, followed quickly by resignation. "He's gone, Chun. I'm sorry. I know you two were close, but he's alive." The words hung in the air between them. Morrison's expression shifted from sympathy to alarm. Command declared him Kia. "You got information says different?" "Radio intercepts." Chen's voice stayed level, controlled. "Taliban chatter about a prisoner. Timeline matches Hawkins' squad." Morrison exhaled slowly, running a hand over his shaved head. "Even if that's true, and that's a big if, Voss shut down recovery ops. You go out there alone, disobeying a direct order. Court-martial offense. Only if someone reports it." Morrison stared at him for a long moment. The armory was quiet except for the distant thump of helicopter rotors and someone's radio playing country music 2 buildings over. "You ever fired a weapon in combat, Chen?" "No." "You ever been outside the wire except for that one convoy escort?" "No." "You got any idea what you're walking into?" "Yes," Chen said simply. "I know exactly what I'm walking into. I've been analyzing enemy tactics at this location for 2 years. I know their patterns, their procedures, their response times. I know the terrain better than anyone in this company because I've studied every satellite photo and drone pass for 24 months. What I don't know is whether I can live with myself if I stay here and do nothing." Morrison was quiet. Then he turned to the weapons rack and pulled down an M4. "You didn't get this from me. You breaking into my armory is a whole different kind of paperwork than me handing you the keys." Chen nodded slowly. "Understood. You got 4 hours before shift change. After that, this gets reported and you become everyone's problem." Morrison started pulling magazines from a locked cabinet. "You remember how to load these?" "Yes." "Combat first aid?" "Qualified." Morrison grabbed a medical kit from a shelf, then paused. "Why are you really doing this?" Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who showed courage when everyone else gave up. Chen didn't answer right away. He thought about his younger brother David, 17 years old, bleeding out on a street corner while Chun hid inside their apartment, too scared to help, too weak to matter. He thought about the funeral where he'd stood silent while his foster mother cried. He thought about every night since when he'd woken up knowing he'd been a coward when it counted most. "Because Hawkins would do it for me," Chun finally said, "and because I'm tired of being the person who does nothing." Morrison handed him the rifle. "Then don't be that person. Be the one who comes back." Chen moved through the armory with practiced efficiency, checking the M4's action, loading magazines, securing the medical kit to his vest. Morrison watched in silence, occasionally handing him equipment without being asked. A canteen, extra batteries, night vision scope that Chun hadn't requested but would need. "You know the terrain out there gets real unfriendly real fast," Morrison said, passing him a topographical map. 12 clicks through mountain passes. Taliban own those routes at night. Then I go during the day. Chun folded the map into his cargo pocket. "Hide during darkness. Move when I can see them coming." Morrison's laugh was short and bitter. "You really have been studying this. Most guys would run in guns blazing, get themselves killed in the first kilometer. Most guys aren't intelligence analysts." Chun secured the last magazine to his vest. "We're trained to think before we act." "Yeah, well, Morrison crossed his arms. Most intelligence analysts don't pick up rifles and go solo into enemy territory. What makes you different? Chun paused, his hands stilling on the equipment. The question hung between them, heavy with implications Morrison couldn't possibly understand. What made him different was 3 years in Oakland's underground fighting circuit. What made him different was learning that being small meant being fast, being overlooked meant being underestimated, and being afraid meant you were still thinking clearly enough to survive. I'm good not being seen, Chun said finally. It's kept me alive before. Before the army? Before a lot of things. Morrison nodded slowly, not pressing. He pulled a sat phone from a locked drawer and handed it over. Encrypted. If you get in trouble, call for extraction. Someone might come get you. Might not. Depends on who's feeling brave that day. Chun took the phone, slipped it into a waterproof pouch on his vest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Morrison's voice went hard. You die out there. I'm the one who has to explain to Michelle Hawkins why her husband died alone because I gave you the weapon to go get yourself killed trying to save him. You understand that weight? I do. No, Morrison said quietly. You don't, but you will. Either when you come back or when you don't. Chun shouldered the rifle, feeling the weight settle into familiar positions his body remembered even if his mind pretended to forget. He told himself when he enlisted that he'd left that life behind. The fighting, the violence, the part of him that knew how to hurt people efficiently and without hesitation. Apparently, that part had just been waiting. He was halfway to the door when Morrison called out, Chun, why'd you really join the army? And don't give me that patriotic duty speech you put on your recruitment paperwork. Chun turned back. To be someone different than who I was. Morrison studied him for a long moment. Then maybe don't go being exactly who you were. Maybe be who Hawkins thinks you are. The words followed Chun out into the sunlight, through the narrow paths between CHUs and supply containers, past Marines running PT drills and contractors unloading supply trucks. Nobody noticed him. Nobody ever did. The quiet specialist with the computer skills and the clearance was part of the background noise, as invisible as the guard towers and the concertina wire. He made it almost to the vehicle depot when Captain Voss's voice cut across the compound like a whip crack. Specialist Chun. My office. Now. Chun stopped. Turned slowly. Voss stood outside the command building, arms crossed over his chest, face set in the expression of barely controlled anger that seemed to be his natural state. Lieutenant Okonkwo stood beside him, her expression carefully neutral. Sir, Chun said, I know exactly what you were just doing. Voss closed the distance between them in 6 long strides. Morrison called it in, said he checked out a weapon in full combat load. Care to explain what an intelligence analyst needs with that kind of hardware? Standard security protocol, sir. Chun kept his voice level. Given the elevated threat level, don't. Voss's face darkened. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is about security protocols. You're planning to go after Hawkins. Alone. Against direct orders. I didn't receive any direct orders, sir. You addressed Lieutenant Okonkwo. You received the same briefing as everyone else in that operation center. Voss's voice rose. No recovery operation. Hawkins is gone. We move on. Those are my orders. Respectfully, sir, those orders applied to official operations. I'm requesting personal leave. The silence that followed was dangerous. Okonkwo shifted uncomfortably. Somewhere across the compound, someone shouted cadence. A helicopter passed overhead, rotors thumping. Personal leave, Voss repeated slowly, each word dripping with contempt. You want personal leave to conduct an unauthorized combat operation in hostile territory. Do you have any idea how many regulations that violates? How many ways I can end your career right now? Yes, sir. Chun met his eyes. All of them. Then why? Voss threw up his hands. Why throw away your career, your freedom, probably your life, for one man who's already dead? He's not dead. The intelligence says Taliban fighters took a prisoner from that ambush site. Radio intercepts confirm it. Pashto chatter about an American, about moving him before we can respond. I can provide you the translated transcripts if, I don't care about your transcripts. Voss stepped closer, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I care about this company. My company. And I'm not risking more lives on a maybe. You go out there, you die, that's on me. Another name I have to write home about. Another mother or father or wife I have to face. You think I want that? No, sir. Then stand down. That's an order, specialist. Direct. Unambiguous. You take one step toward that gate, I'll have you arrested for disobeying a direct order in a combat zone. Chun felt something shift inside him. The careful control he'd maintained since enlisting, the discipline that kept the old Marcus Chun buried and forgotten, cracked just enough to let truth slip through. Then arrest me, sir, because I'm going anyway. Voss's face went purple. Okonkwo put a hand on his arm, her voice urgent. Sir, perhaps we could stay out of this, Lieutenant. Voss shook her off, focused entirely on Chun. You disobey this order, your career is over. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison time, your entire future gone. For what? For one sergeant who made his own choice to go on that patrol. For the one sergeant who treated me like I mattered, Chun said quietly. For the one man in this entire company who looked at me and saw a soldier instead of a clerk. For the person who would absolutely come for me if our positions were reversed, and we both know it, sir. Voss opened his mouth, closed it. Something flickered in his expression, too fast to read. Sir, Okonkwo spoke again, her voice careful. If Specialist Chun is determined to proceed despite orders, perhaps we could document this as what, Lieutenant? Desertion? Insubordination? Voss rounded on her. There's no regulation that covers going rogue on a rescue mission. No precedent that makes this anything other than what it is. Disobedience. Chun shifted the rifle on his shoulder. With respect, sir, there's also no regulation that says I can't use my approved leave time to take a walk outside the wire. What happens during that walk is between me and the terrain. The muscles in Voss's jaw worked. That's the thinnest excuse I've ever heard. Specialist. Yes, sir, but it's the one I'm using. Voss stared at him for what felt like an hour. Then he turned to Okonkwo. Lieutenant, call the MPs. Have them detain Specialist Chun pending disciplinary action. Okonkwo hesitated. Her eyes met Chin's for just a moment, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or respect. Then she reached for her radio. Chin didn't run, didn't resist, just stood there in the Afghan sun, weapon on his shoulder, knowing that in about 30 seconds his chance to save Hawkins would evaporate. Knowing that he'd tried, at least. That for once in his life, he'd chosen courage over safety. Sir, Okonkwo said slowly. My radio appears to be malfunctioning. Voss spun to face her. What? Battery's dead, sir. I'll need to return to the command center to retrieve a replacement. That could take some time. She held his gaze. Voss's eyes narrowed. How much time, Lieutenant? 15 minutes, sir. Maybe 20. Okonkwo turned on her heel and walked away, her pace measured and deliberate, leaving Voss and Chun alone in the space between buildings. Voss's voice dropped to something that wasn't quite a whisper. You have until she gets back. After that, I can't stop what happens. Chun nodded once. Understood, sir. And Chun? Voss's expression remained hard, but something else lurked underneath. If you somehow pull this off, if you get Hawkins back alive, I'll still court-martial you. Because I can't have soldiers thinking they can ignore orders whenever their feelings tell them to. Yes, sir. But if you do pull it off, Voss continued, voice even quieter, I'll make sure the defense counsel is the best we have. Chun felt the ghost of a smile. Thank you, sir. Voss turned away, shoulders rigid. I never had this conversation. You were never here. Chun moved before the words finished, leaving Voss's mouth, his feet carrying him toward the motor pool, toward the gate, toward the mountains where Hawkins was either alive or wasn't, where Chun would either become a hero or a cautionary tale told to fresh specialists about the dangers of thinking you're more than your MOS. He'd been invisible his whole life. One more time wouldn't hurt. The guards at the gate waved him through without question. Just another specialist on another detail. So unremarkable, they'd probably forget his face before their shift ended. Chin passed through the wire and into the Afghan hills, and behind him, Forward Operating Base Zephyr continued its operations as if nothing had changed at all. The mountains swallowed Chun whole within the first kilometer. One moment he could still see the guard towers of FOB Zephyr behind him. The next he was alone in a landscape of rock and shadow that had been killing soldiers for thousands of years. The sun hammered down from a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the air tasted like dust and something ancient. Chun moved low and slow, using the terrain the way he'd learned in Oakland, when being seen meant being caught, and being caught meant bleeding. Every step was calculated, every pause deliberate. He wasn't a soldier marching toward combat. He was a shadow passing through a world that didn't know he existed. The satellite imagery he'd memorized proved accurate. The valley carved northeast through the mountains exactly as the photos showed, narrow enough that echoes would carry, wide enough that crossing it meant exposure. Chun skirted the edges, staying in the broken ground where rocks provided cover and shadow swallowed his silhouette. 2 hours in, he found the first sign he wasn't alone. Boot prints in the dust, American issue, headed northeast in a hurry. Chun crouched beside them, reading the story they told. 4 men running, spacing irregular, depths suggesting full combat loads. Hawkins patrol. The prints were 8 hours old, maybe 9. Already the wind was starting to erase them. Chun followed the trail like a thread through a maze. His analytical mind cataloged everything. Spent brass casings scattered near a cluster of boulders. Impact marks on stone where bullets had struck. Dark stains on the ground that could have been blood or could have been shadow. Probably blood. The ambush site revealed itself gradually. Chun spotted it from 300 meters out, recognition clicking into place with the cold certainty of a puzzle piece finding its home. The valley narrowed here, forcing movement into a natural funnel. High ground on both sides provided perfect firing positions. Classic kill zone, the kind he'd identified on satellite photos 100 times but never seen with his own eyes. He went aground behind a rockfall and pulled out his scope. The terrain jumped into focus, details sharpening. Empty shell casings littered the high positions. At least 20 fighters had occupied those rocks, maybe more. The Americans had walked straight into a prepared ambush. No chance of winning, only surviving. Movement caught his attention. Chun's pulse spiked, then steadied as training took over. He tracked the motion through his scope, finding a figure moving among the rocks where the patrol had made their stand. Taliban fighter, AK-47 slung over his shoulder, searching the ground, looking for equipment, souvenirs, intelligence. Chun watched him for 5 minutes, completely still. The fighter was young, maybe 18. Careless in the way young fighters got when they thought the danger had passed. He kicked at a discarded canteen, picked up a magazine pouch, examined it, tossed it aside. Then the fighter stopped, bent down, lifted something small and square from the dust. Chun's stomach clenched as he recognized it through the scope. A photograph. He couldn't make out the image from this distance, but he knew what it showed. Hawkins and his daughters, the picture he kept in his chest pocket, the one he'd shown Chun a dozen times while talking about what they'd do when he got home. The fighter laughed, called out to someone Chun couldn't see. Another voice answered from the rocks above, words in Pashto that Chun's limited vocabulary struggled to translate. Something about the prisoner. Something about moving him soon. Chun's breath caught. Prisoner. Present tense. Alive. 2 more fighters emerged from cover, joining the first. They stood in the open, relaxed, confident. Why wouldn't they be? The Americans had already declared Hawkins dead. No rescue was coming. This was their territory, their victory, their time to celebrate. Chun's finger drifted toward the trigger, muscle memory from another life guiding the motion. 3 targets. Effective range. Clear sight lines. He could drop all 3 before they knew what was happening. Had done worse in Oakland when survival demanded it. But that was the old Marcus Chun. The one who'd fought in basements for money and respect. The one who'd learned that violence was just another tool, no different than a wrench or a hammer. The army had given him a different path, a different purpose. Except now that path and purpose had brought him right back to the same choice. Kill or fail. Chun forced his finger away from the trigger. 3 dead fighters would alert everyone within 10 kilometers that Americans were operating in the area. It would get him killed and guarantee Hawkins died too. Smart play was patience. Wait for them to leave. Mark their direction. Follow a distance. The fighters moved off eventually, heading northeast into a canyon Chen's maps showed as a dead end. Except it wasn't a dead end if you knew the terrain. Chun had spotted the cave system on thermal imaging 6 months ago, marked it as a probable Taliban staging area, filed the report that nobody ever read because intelligence from desk analysts didn't carry the same weight as intelligence from infantry scouts. He waited 30 minutes after the fighters disappeared. Then he moved. The canyon walls rose steep on both sides, channeling air and sound in ways that made Chen's skin crawl. Every footstep seemed to echo. Every breath sounded too loud. This was the kind of place where ambushes happened, where one man with a rifle could hold off a platoon. Chun found the cave entrance exactly where his memory said it would be. A crack in the rock face, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. The kind of position that showed up as a thermal signature anomaly on satellite passes, but looked like nothing to the naked eye. Voices drifted from inside. Pashto, rapid and animated. Chun pressed himself against the rock wall, straining to understand. His vocabulary was limited, but he caught enough. American. Alive. Wounded. Commander coming. Decision soon. Chun pulled back, mind racing through options. Direct assault was suicide. Wait for dark. Hope for better positioning. Call for backup. Admit he couldn't do this alone. Turn back. Accept that trying was enough. His hand found the sat phone Morrison had given him. One call. That's all it would take. Someone might come. Probably wouldn't, but might. And Hawkins would still die, while Chun waited for help that never arrived. He thought about David again, his brother bleeding out while Chun hid. The choice he'd made then. The choice he'd regretted every day since. Cowardice dressed up as survival. Safety purchased with someone else's life. Not again. Chun moved along the canyon wall, searching for another approach. The cave system had multiple entrances according to the thermal imaging. Secondary access points that the Taliban might not guard as carefully. He just had to find them. The sun tracked across the sky, shadows lengthening, heat giving way to the sharp cold that came to the mountains without warning. Chun worked methodically, covering ground in careful increments, stopping frequently to listen, to watch, to ensure he remained invisible. He found what he needed as the sun touched the western peaks. A chimney in the rock, narrow enough that most men couldn't squeeze through, dropping 20 feet into darkness. Chun could see light at the bottom. Firelight. Voices echoing up from below. Chun secured his rifle across his back, tested the rock, and started to climb down. The walls pressed close, scraping his vest, catching on his equipment. Halfway down, a handhold crumbled under his weight. Chun slid 3 feet, shoulder slamming into stone, the sound seeming to echo like a gunshot. He froze. Below, the voices stopped. Chun hung motionless in the darkness, barely breathing, waiting for the shouts that would mean discovery. Waiting for rifle barrels to appear in the gap below. Waiting for the end. Seconds stretched. The voices resumed, conversation returning to normal rhythm. Someone laughed. Equipment rattled. Life continued, unaware of the intruder suspended above. Chun started moving again, slower now, testing each hole before committing his weight. The gap at the bottom was barely large enough for his shoulders. He could see through it now, into the cave below. The space opened into a natural chamber lit by oil lamps and a small fire. Supplies lined one wall. Ammunition crates. Weapons. Medical supplies, probably stolen from coalition forces. And against the far wall, hands bound behind his back, face swollen and bloody, sat Sergeant First Class Dale Hawkins. Chen's heart hammered so hard he thought they'd hear it. Hawkins was alive, barely conscious from the look of him, but alive. 3 fighters sat nearby, talking and smoking, weapons within easy reach but not in hand. Confident, comfortable. Hawkins stirred, head lifting slightly. His eyes were swollen, nearly shut, but they tracked across the cave with the awareness of a man fighting to stay alert. Looking for opportunities. looking for escape. His gaze passed over the chimney opening, moved on, then snapped back. Chen saw the moment Hawkins registered what he was seeing. The tiny gap in the rock, the shadow that didn't quite match the stone, the face looking down at him from impossible terrain. Hawkins' expression didn't change, didn't give anything away, but his right hand, bound behind his back, made a small gesture. Chen recognized it from briefings on prisoner protocols. 5-finger spread. Wait 5 minutes. Chen nodded fractionally, then pulled back from the gap. His mind was already working through possibilities. 3 fighters. 1 injured prisoner. Limited time before the commander arrived to make whatever decision they were waiting for. Chen needed a plan that didn't get them both killed. He checked his equipment. For magazines. 1 medical kit. 2 grenades Morrison had slipped into his vest without comment. A knife he'd carried since Oakland. The one piece of his old life he hadn't been able to abandon. Not much to work with. But then again, Chun had survived with less. He settled in to wait, watching the shadows lengthen across the canyon floor, and began to plan how an intelligence analyst would do the impossible. The 5 minutes stretched into an eternity. Chun remained pressed against the rock, listening to the voices below, trying to decipher intent from tone. The Taliban fighters sounded relaxed, almost bored. Whatever they were waiting for hadn't arrived yet. Through the narrow gap, Chun watched Hawkins. The sergeant had shifted position slightly, turning so his bound hands were visible to Chen's vantage point. His fingers moved in subtle gestures. 3 fingers, then pointing northeast, then a slashing motion across his throat. Chen translated the message. 3 more fighters, coming from the northeast. Kill order expected. The confirmation hit like ice water. Whatever patience the Taliban commander had was running out. Hawkins wasn't a valuable prisoner to be traded or leveraged. He was a problem to be eliminated, and the only question was timing. Movement at the main cave entrance confirmed Hawkins' warning. 2 men entered, weapons ready, alert in a way the others weren't. They spoke rapid Pashto to the guards, words Shin couldn't fully catch, but didn't need to. The body language said everything. Urgency, authority, decision time. One of the new arrivals was older, maybe 40, with the bearing of someone who'd been fighting longer than most of these kids have been alive. He crossed to Hawkins, grabbed him by the hair, yanked his head back, said something in broken English that made the other fighters laugh. Hawkins spat blood at his feet. The older fighter's hand moved so fast Chin almost missed it. A backhand across Hawkins' face that echoed in the cave like a gunshot. Hawkins' head snapped sideways, but he didn't make a sound. Didn't give them the satisfaction. Chin's finger found the trigger again. The range was bad, the angle worse, but he could make the shot. Drop the older fighter, maybe one more before they scattered. Give Hawkins a chance to move, to fight, to do something other than sit there and take it. The older fighter pulled a knife from his belt. Long blade, curved, the kind designed for one purpose. He held it up so Hawkins could see it, said something else in Pashto that made the others go quiet. Chin's breathing stopped. This wasn't an interrogation anymore. This was an execution. The fighter grabbed Hawkins' shirt, positioned the blade against his throat. One of the younger Taliban raised a phone, recording propaganda footage, proof of the kill, the kind of video that would show up on extremist websites within hours. Chin moved without thinking. His rifle came up, barrel finding the gap, sight picture forming through muscle memory older than his enlistment date. The older fighter's head filled the scope. Center mass. Exhale. Squeeze. The rifle crack shattered the cave's stillness. The older fighter's head snapped back, knife clattering from his hand. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The phone fell, screen cracking against stone. For one frozen heartbeat, nobody moved. The remaining fighters stared at their commander's body, brains trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand where the shot had come from. Chin didn't give them time to figure it out. He dropped through the chimney, rifle leading, landing hard but rolling with the impact. 3 fighters were scrambling for weapons. Chun shot the nearest one twice, center mass, exactly the way the range instructors had taught him. The man went down. The second fighter had his AK up, finger on the trigger. Chin dove left, felt round snap past his head, stone chips exploding where he'd been standing. He came up firing, 3-round bursts that caught the fighter in the chest and throat. The third fighter ran. Smart play. Chun tracked him through the sight, finger tightening. The fighter reached the cave entrance, started to turn, mouth opening to shout warning. Chen shot in the back. The silence that followed was absolute, except for the ringing in Chen's ears. Gun smoke drifted in the lamplight. 3 bodies. No, for counting the commander. For men dead in maybe 10 seconds. Chen's hands were steady, his breathing controlled. The shaking would come later, when the adrenaline faded and his mind caught up to what his body had just done. Hawkins stared at him with eyes that couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. "Chun, that you?" "Yeah." Chen moved to him, pulling his knife, cutting the zip ties. "It's me." "How did you?" Hawkins tried to stand, legs giving out. Chen caught him, felt the damage. Broken ribs at least. Maybe internal bleeding. Definitely severe dehydration. "You're not infantry. You're intel. How are you even here?" "Long story." Chun helped him toward the cave wall, propping him up. "Can you walk?" "Not well." Hawkins' breathing was labored, each word an effort. "They worked me over pretty good. Thought I was giving them something useful. Kept asking about convoy schedules. Base defenses. I told them nothing." "I know." Chun pulled the medical kit, started assessing injuries. "This is going to hurt." "Already hurts." Hawkins managed something close to a smile. "Morphine would be good, though." Chun administered the injection, hands working on autopilot while his mind raced through the next problem. For dead Taliban. Probably more outside. The sound of gunfire would carry in these mountains. Every fighter within a kilometer would be converging on this location. "We need to move," Chin said. "Now." "Can't." Hawkins shook his head. "Left leg's broken. They snapped it when I wouldn't talk. I can maybe crawl, but running's not happening. Then I'll carry you." "Chin, look at me." Hawkins grabbed his vest, eyes desperate. "I'm dead weight. You got here somehow, got past their security, killed 4 fighters. That's already impossible. Don't throw it away trying to haul me out. Get yourself back. Tell Michelle I fought hard." Chin met his eyes. "Sergeant, with all due respect, shut up. I didn't come this far to leave without you. You don't understand." Hawkins coughed, blood on his lips. "There's at least 15 more fighters. Maybe 20. They'll be here any minute. You got no backup, no extraction, no chance." "I know." Chin finished bandaging the worst wounds, started fashioning a splint for Hawkins' leg. "That's why we need to move right now. You're insane." The morphine was hitting, Hawkins' voice getting dreamy. "Always thought you were normal. Quiet kid with computers. Turns out you're crazy. Turns out lots of things." Chin got an arm under Hawkins' shoulders, braced himself. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. He lifted, legs straining, every muscle screaming. Hawkins was 200 pounds of solid weight, most of it injured. Chin was 5'7" and 140 soaking wet. Physics said this shouldn't work. Physics had never met Oakland Marcus Chun. Chin moved toward the cave entrance. Hawkins slung across his shoulders in a fireman's carry, rifle dangling from its sling. Each step was agony. Each breath felt like broken glass. But he moved anyway, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing, and he'd failed enough for one lifetime. They made it maybe 20 feet before voices echoed from outside. Shouts in Pashto, running footsteps. Chun pressed against the cave wall, lowered Hawkins as gently as he could, brought his rifle up. "How many rounds you got left?" Hawkins asked, voice thick with morphine and pain. "Enough," Chin hoped. The first fighter came through the entrance at a run, weapon ready. Chin shot him. The second one tried to be smart, ducking low, coming in fast. Chin shot him too. 3 more piled up at the entrance, smart enough not to rush blindly into a kill zone. Chin pulled one of Morrison's grenades from his vest, counted to 3, threw it around the corner into the entrance passage. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. Screams followed, then silence. "That's 1, Chin said, mostly to himself. "1 what?" Hawkins slurred. "1 grenade. Got 1 more. That's your exit strategy? Grenades? Working so far." Chun hauled him up again, staggered toward the rear of the cave. The chimney he'd come down was impossible now with Hawkins' weight. But the thermal imaging had shown another passage, deeper in, narrower but navigable. Maybe. They moved into darkness, leaving the lamplight behind. Chin pulled out a small flashlight, the beam barely penetrating the black. The passage twisted, dropped, rose again. Chin's shoulders scraped rock on both sides. Hawkins grunted with each jarring step but didn't complain. Behind them, voices echoed. Pursuit coming. Not fast, because they'd be cautious now, aware that the trapped American had already killed at least 7 of them. But coming nonetheless. The passage opened suddenly into another chamber, this one natural, untouched. A crack in the ceiling showed stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Evening had arrived, while Chun had been underground. Time had become fluid, meaningless. Chun set Hawkins down, moved to the crack. It was maybe 3 feet across, 15 feet up. Climbable, but not with an injured man. Leave me, Hawkins said. His voice had gotten worse, breathing more labored. Internal injuries catching up. I can hold him here. Buy you time to get out. No. Chun, be smart. I'm being smart. Chun was already pulling rope from his pack. The climbing cord Morrison had included without being asked. Smart is getting us both out. There's no us. Hawkins coughed again, more blood. There's a dead sergeant and a crazy specialist who's about to join him. Do the math. I did. Chun tied the rope around Hawkins' chest, tested the knot. Math says I'm not leaving you. Why? Hawkins grabbed his arm, grip weak, but desperate. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. We're not even that close. I was just being decent, treating you like a person. That's not worth dying for. Chun stopped, looked at him, really looked at him in the dim starlight filtering through the crack above. You treated me like a person when nobody else did. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone. You made me feel like I mattered when I'd spent my whole life being told I didn't. So yeah, Sergeant, that's exactly worth dying for. And if you think I'm leaving you here after you gave me that, then you don't understand what it meant. Hawkins stared at him, then nodded slowly. Okay. What do you need me to do? Just don't die yet. Chun started climbing, rope in hand. Gives me something to aim for. Chin climbed like his life depended on it, because it did. The rock face was unforgiving, edges sharp enough to cut through his gloves, holds barely wide enough for fingertips. 15 feet might as well have been 15 miles when every muscle screamed and exhaustion pulled at him like gravity with a grudge. Below, Hawkins slumped against the cave wall, rope secured around his chest, eyes tracking Chin's progress with the glazed focus of someone riding the edge of consciousness. Behind him, deeper in the cave system, voices grew louder. The Taliban were coming, moving carefully but inevitably, like a tide that couldn't be stopped. Chin's hand found the lip of the crack. He pulled himself up and over, rolling on a solid ground under a sky full of stars that didn't care about 2 Americans trying not to die in Afghan mountains. The rope bit into his palms as he braced himself, testing his position. Okay, Chin called down softly. I'm going to pull you up. This is going to hurt. Everything hurts, Hawkins managed. What's a little more? Chin started to haul. The rope went taut. Hawkins' weight hit the line, and Chin's world became nothing but strain and pain and the absolute refusal to let go. His shoulders felt like they were tearing. His hands burned. The rope cut into his palms, even through the gloves. Hawkins rose inch by inch, spinning slowly in the darkness. Chun could hear him breathing, each gasp wet and labored. The broken ribs made every movement agony, but Hawkins didn't cry out, didn't make a sound that would give away their position. Halfway up, the voices below got closer. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping the chamber. Chun froze, arms trembling with effort, rope burning. If they looked up now, if they saw Hawkins suspended in the air, it was over. The light passed under Hawkins, missing him by inches. Voices conferred in rapid Pashto. Confusion about where the Americans had gone. The cave system had multiple passages. They were splitting up to search. Chun pulled harder, ignoring the fire in his muscles. Hawkins cleared the lip of the crack. Chun grabbed his vest, hauled him over the edge, both of them collapsing on the ground, gasping. For a moment, neither moved. Chin's vision swam with exhaustion. His hands were bloody inside the gloves. Every breath felt like someone was driving nails into his chest. "We made it," Hawkins whispered. "Not yet." Chin forced himself to sit up. "This just gets us outside. We still have to get back to base. 12 kilometers. Hawkins laughed, the sound broken. "With me like this, in the dark, with 20 Taliban hunting us. Should be easy." Chin pulled out the sat phone Morrison had given him. For the first time since leaving base, he allowed himself to consider calling for help. Real help. Professional soldiers with helicopters and air support and all the things that made rescue operations work. His thumb hovered over the power button. "Don't," Hawkins said. "You call that in? Voss will have you arrested the second you land. Court-martial. Prison. Everything you were willing to risk, gone for nothing. Better than dead. Is it?" Hawkins' eyes were clear despite the morphine and pain. "You came out here because you were tired of being nothing, of being invisible. You call for help now? You're right back to being the clerk who needed real soldiers to save him. That what you want?" Chin looked at the phone, then put it away. "No, that's not what I want." "Then we walk." Hawkins tried to stand, made it halfway before his leg gave out. Chin caught him. "You can't walk." "Then you carry me." Hawkins met his eyes. "You got me this far. Finish it." Chin got an arm under his shoulders again, pulled him up. The weight settled across his back, and Chin's legs nearly buckled. He was already exhausted from the climb, from the firefight, from the sheer stress of the last 6 hours. Carrying Hawkins 12 kilometers was impossible. He started walking anyway. The terrain was even worse at night. What had been difficult in daylight became treacherous in darkness. Every step was a gamble. Every rock could turn an ankle. Every shadow could hide a cliff edge. Chin moved like he'd moved through Oakland streets after fights. Slowly, carefully, aware that one mistake meant everything ended. His night vision scope helped, painting the world in green and gray, but it couldn't show every hazard. They'd made maybe a kilometer when Hawkins spoke again, voice dreamy with morphine. "Never told you why I talked to you that first time. In the DFAC. You were being nice." "No." Hawkins shifted slightly. "I mean, yeah, but there was more. You reminded me of someone. Kid I knew in basic. Small guy. Quiet. Everyone underestimated him. Drill sergeants rode him hard. Other recruits gave him shit. Then one day during combatives training, he put 3 guys in the hospital. Turned out he had a black belt in something nobody could pronounce. Been training since he was 6. What happened to him? Made special forces. Last I heard, he was doing things that don't officially exist." Hawkins coughed. "Point is, I looked at you and saw that same thing. Someone hiding something. Someone who was more than they appeared. I'm not special forces material. No, but you're something. You proved that today. Question is, were you really?" Chin was quiet for a long moment, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. The question deserved an answer, but the truth was complicated. Ugly in ways that didn't fit the Army's neat categories of good and bad. "I grew up in Oakland," Chin said finally. "Foster care, rough neighborhood. My brother David was all I had. When I was 19, he got jumped by a gang. They beat him in the street while I watched from our apartment window. I was too scared to help, too weak to matter. He died on the pavement while I hid. Jesus, Sheng. After that, I had to become different, stronger, someone who wouldn't hide next time. So I found the underground circuit. Bare-knuckle fights in basements and warehouses. No rules, no mercy. You fight until someone can't anymore. I was small, so I learned to be fast, to hit weak points, to end fights before size mattered. How long? 3 years. Made enough money to survive. Got good enough that people started to know my name. Then one night, I nearly killed someone. Kid even younger than David had been. I realized I'd become something worse than the people who kill my brother. So I enlisted. Thought the Army would make me better. Did it?" Chun adjusted Hawkins' weight, kept moving. "I don't know. Today I killed 7 men. Some of them were younger than my brother was. And I didn't hesitate. Didn't feel anything except the need to complete the mission. So maybe I'm not better. Maybe I'm just the same person with a different uniform." "You saved my life," Hawkins said quietly. "Those men you killed were torturing me, recording my execution. You stopped that. In my book, that makes you better than whatever you were. Or maybe it just makes me useful." They walked in silence after that. Or Chin walked while Hawkins drifted in and out of awareness. The morphine was wearing off, pain breaking through in waves that made Hawkins gasp and tense. Chin had another dose, but didn't want to use it yet. Not until he had to. The night grew colder. Chin's legs burned. His back felt like someone had driven an axe into his spine. Sweat soaked through his uniform despite the temperature. He focused on breathing, on stepping, on the simple mechanics of forward motion. 2 kilometers. 3. Time lost meaning. The stars wheeled overhead. The mountains around them stayed silent, except for wind and the occasional distant sound that might have been voices or might have been imagination. Chun was so focused on the terrain ahead that he almost missed the light behind them. He stopped, turned carefully. Far back along their route, maybe a kilometer distant, flashlight beams danced in the darkness. Multiple lights, moving in their direction. The Taliban had found their trail. "We got company," Chin said. "How many?" "Too many." Chin scanned the terrain ahead. They were in open ground now, the valley floor, nowhere to hide. The next cover was at least half a kilometer ahead. "We're not going to outrun them. Then we fight. You can barely stay conscious." Chun kept moving, faster now despite the exhaustion. "I'm not fighting 20 men in the open. What's the alternative?" Chin's mind raced through options, discarding each as quickly as it formed. They couldn't hide, couldn't fight, couldn't outrun pursuit. The sat phone was still an option, but even if help came, it would take time they didn't have. There had to be something, some advantage he could create, some terrain feature he could exploit, The idea hit him like a physical blow. Terrible, dangerous, almost certainly suicide, but possible. "I have an idea," Chin said. "You're going to hate it. If it involves me staying behind to slow them down, it doesn't." Chun adjusted course slightly, angling toward a ridge he remembered from satellite photos. "But you're definitely going to hate it." "What is it?" Chun kept walking, conserving breath. Behind them, the lights grew closer. Ahead, the ridge materialized from the darkness, a sharp rise in the terrain that marked a geographic feature Chun had noted months ago during routine analysis. A dry riverbed, deep enough to provide cover, narrow enough to create a choke point. And if the seasonal rains had done their job, unstable enough to collapse under the right kind of persuasion. He had 1 grenade left. It would have to be enough. "Hold on," Chun said. "This is going to get rough." "Rougher than it's been?" Hawkins' laugh turned into a cough. "Much rougher." Chun started down into the riverbed, boots sliding on loose stone. "Because we're about to make the entire Taliban force very angry. They're already angry. You killed 7 of them." "True." Chun found the position he wanted, a spot where the riverbed narrowed and the walls rose steep on both sides. "But they're about to get angrier." He set Hawkins down as gently as possible, positioned him against the far wall. Then he pulled out his last grenade, studied the terrain, calculated angles and blast radius, and whether this insane plan had any chance of working. The lights were close now, maybe 500 meters. Voices carried in the night air. They'd be here in minutes. Chin pulled the pin, threw the grenade at the narrow point where the riverbed walls were weakest, and prayed he hadn't just killed them both. The explosion tore through the night like the world breaking open. The grenade detonated at the precise point Chun had calculated, where stress fractures in the rock wall met loose sediment from decades of erosion. The blast wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to reshape terrain. It worked better than Chun had hoped. The riverbed wall collapsed in a cascading failure, tons of rock and dirt sliding down to block the narrow passage. Dust billowed in choking clouds. The roar echoed off the mountains, loud enough that Chin's ears rang even from their protected position 50 meters downstream. When the rumbling stopped, a wall of debris 15 feet high blocked the passage behind them. Not permanent, not even particularly stable, but enough to buy time. The Taliban voices on the other side erupted in confusion and anger. Flashlight beams played over the rockfall, searching for a way through. Chin could hear them discussing options in rapid Pashto. Go around, climb over, dig through. All possibilities, all time-consuming. "That was beautiful," Hawkins said, voice weak but genuine. "Insane but beautiful. Learned it from intelligence analysis. Chun helped him up again, got him positioned across his shoulders. Study terrain long enough, you see the weak points. They teach that at analyst school? No. Chun started moving, legs protesting every step. Learned that in Oakland. Different terrain, same principle. Everything has a breaking point. You just have to know where to push. The riverbed led them northeast, away from pursuit, roughly parallel to the route back to FOB Zephyr. Not the direct path, but the Taliban would expect direct. Chin was banking on them, spreading out to cover obvious approaches while he took the long way around. For kilometers to go, maybe 5 with the detour. Chin's body had moved past exhaustion into something else entirely. A state where pain became white noise and motion became automatic. He'd been here before, in Oakland, during the marathon fights that lasted until someone collapsed. This was just another marathon, just another fight. The opponent was distance and time instead of fists, but the principle remained the same. Don't stop. Don't quit. Survive. You're not normal, Hawkins said suddenly. His words were slurring again, consciousness fading. Normal people don't do what you did today. Already established, I'm not normal. No, I mean, Hawkins struggled for focus. The way you move, the way you fight, that's not beginner's luck. That's training. Real training. Where'd you really learn that? Chin was quiet for a moment, watching the terrain ahead. The truth was going to come out eventually. Might as well be now. Oakland Underground Circuit. 3 years of bare-knuckle fights. No refs, no rules, no mercy. You fight until someone can't anymore. I won more than I lost. Jesus, Sheng. That's not training. That's survival of the fittest. That's what Oakland was. Survival. Every fight taught me something. How to read opponents. How to exploit weakness. How to end things fast when you're outsized. The Army gave me better tools and legal authorization, but the fundamentals came from basements and warehouses where the only rule was don't die. And today I used everything I learned. Chun adjusted Hawkins' weight, kept moving. The analytical skills from the Army. The tactical knowledge from intelligence work. The violence from Oakland. All of it together. I became what I needed to be to get you out. That scares you. It should scare both of us. Chin's voice went quiet. Because I didn't hesitate. When I killed those men, I didn't feel guilt or horror or anything they tell you you're supposed to feel. I felt efficient. Like I was solving a problem. And that's not normal either. Maybe normal's overrated. Hawkins coughed, the sound wet and painful. Maybe what matters is what you do with it. You could have used those skills to hurt people. You chose to save someone instead. That counts for something, does it? Or did I just find a socially acceptable outlet for violence? You're thinking too much. Just keep walking. Chun kept walking. The riverbed eventually climbed out of the valley floor, merging with rocky terrain that provided better cover but harder travel. Chin's night vision scope painted everything in shades of green, but it couldn't show him the easy path because there wasn't one. They were maybe 6 kilometers from base when Chun heard the sound that made his heart stop. Helicopter rotors. Distant but approaching. His first thought was rescue. Someone at FOB Zephyr had sent help. Then reality caught up. American helicopters wouldn't be flying search patterns at night in hostile territory without authorization. And Voss had made it clear no authorization was coming. Which meant Taliban. Or worse, one of the local militia groups that operated their own aircraft salvaged Soviet equipment that still flew despite being held together with hope and spite. Chun scanned the sky, found the navigation lights. Single aircraft flying a search pattern, moving in their general direction. Thermal imaging probably. Looking for heat signatures in the cold mountain night. We need to hide, Chun said. Now, where? Hawkins managed to look around. We're in open terrain. Not anymore. Chun had spotted what he needed. A rock overhang, deep enough to provide shelter, cold stone that would mask their thermal signature if they could get under it fast enough. He stumbled toward it, exhaustion making his movements clumsy. Hawkins was dead, weight across his shoulders, unconscious again or close to it. Chin's legs threatened to give out with each step, but he drove them forward through sheer will. The overhang was 50 meters away. 40, 30. The helicopter's sound grew louder, rotors beating the air with mechanical precision. 20 meters. Chin's vision started to tunnel. His lungs burned. Every muscle screamed for him to stop, to rest, to accept that he'd done enough, and failing now wasn't really failing at all. He thought about David again, about watching his brother die because he'd been too weak to act, about the years of self-loathing that followed, the violence he'd embraced trying to prove he was different, the endless cycle of trying to outrun a choice he'd made when he was 19 and terrified. This was different. This time he was strong enough. This time he wouldn't fail. Chen made it to the overhang with seconds to spare. He collapsed under the stone shelf, Hawkins rolling off his shoulders, both of them gasping in the darkness. The cold rock pressed against Chen's back, leaching warmth, but it would also hide them from thermal scans. The helicopter passed overhead, searchlight sweeping the terrain. The beam came close, maybe 10 meters from their position, bright enough that Chun could see the dust it kicked up. Then it moved on, continuing its pattern, looking for targets that weren't there. Chen waited until the sound faded before allowing himself to breathe normally. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. He'd pushed himself beyond every reasonable limit, and his body was sending urgent messages about consequences. He ignored them, still had kilometers to go, still had to get Hawkins home alive. The shaking would stop, the pain would fade. Everything would wait until after he completed the mission. Hawkins stirred, eyes opening slightly. We clear? For now. Chen checked his watch. 4 hours until dawn. We need to move before light. Can't. Hawkins' breathing was shallow, labored. Need a rest. Just a few minutes. Chen checked him over, his combat first aid training recognizing the signs. Shock setting in. Blood loss catching up despite the bandages. Broken ribs, probably puncturing something internal. Hawkins needed a hospital, surgery, things Chun couldn't provide with a basic medical kit in the middle of hostile territory. The sat phone was right there in his pocket. One call. That's all it would take. Professional medics, real equipment, a chance at survival beyond what Chen's stubborn refusal to quit could provide. His hand moved toward the phone. Stopped. Voss's words echoed in his memory. Court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Prison time. Everything Chun had tried to build in the army gone. But Hawkins would live. That mattered more than Chen's career. More than his pride. More than proving he was different from the coward who'd let his brother die. Chen pulled out the phone. Started to power it on. Hawkins' hand caught his wrist. Grip weak, but determined. Don't, Hawkins whispered. You got this far. Finish it. You need real medical help. I need you to not throw your life away for mine. Hawkins' eyes locked on his. You came out here to prove something. To yourself, maybe to me, probably to everyone who's ever underestimated you. You call for help now, you prove them right. You prove you're just a clerk who needed saving. Better than you dying. Everyone dies, Chun. The question is whether we matter before we do. You matter. What you've done today matters. Don't let them take that away by making you call for rescue. Chun looked at the phone. At Hawkins. At the darkness around them, where pursuit was probably regrouping, planning, hunting. The smart play was obvious. The safe play was clear. You put the phone away. Then we rest for 10 minutes. Chun settled against the rock, rifle across his lap. After that, we walk the rest of the way. However long it takes. However long it takes, Hawkins agreed, eyes already closing. Chun sat in the darkness and listened to Hawkins breathe. Each breath was a victory. Each moment of survival was defiance against the odds. They made it this far through impossible circumstances. The last few kilometers were just details. He checked his ammunition. 2 magazines left. 40 rounds. Enough for one more fight if it came to that. And it probably would, because nothing about today had been easy and the universe didn't owe them a clean finish. The 10 minutes stretched to 15 while Chun tried to gather enough strength to move. His body had crossed the line from tired to damaged. Moving Hawkins another 4 kilometers might cause permanent injury. Might not even be possible. He stood up anyway, got Hawkins positioned, started walking. Because the alternative was giving up, and Chun had done that once before. Never again. The mountains watched them pass, ancient and indifferent. Somewhere behind them, the Taliban continued their search. Somewhere ahead, FOB Zephyr waited, unaware that two of their own were fighting to get home. Chin focused on the next step, then the next, building distance one footfall at a time, carrying a man who'd shown him kindness when no one else had, refusing to let mathematics or common sense or physical limitations define what was possible. Dawn was 3 hours away. Base was 4 kilometers distant. The odds of making it were terrible. Chin had survived worse odds before. He kept walking. 3 kilometers from base, Chin's left leg gave out. Not gradually, not with warning. One moment he was walking, the next his knee buckled and he went down hard, Hawkins spilling off his shoulders. Chin caught himself on his hands, asphalt scraping palms, already raw from the rope work. Pain shot up from his leg in white-hot spikes that made his vision blur. He tried to stand. His leg wouldn't cooperate. The muscles had simply quit, pushed beyond their breaking point, now refusing to take orders from a brain that didn't understand the concept of limits. "Chun," Hawkins said weakly. "You okay?" "Fine." Chun forced himself upright, using his rifle as a crutch. His leg screamed, but held. "Barely. Just need a second." That was a lie, and they both knew it. Chun had pushed his body past exhaustion, past injury, into territory where permanent damage became likely. His leg might hold for another few meters. Might not. Either way, carrying Hawkins another 3 kilometers wasn't happening. The pre-dawn darkness was starting to soften at the edges. In another hour, full daylight would expose them to anyone watching. The Taliban would regroup. Pursuit would resume. And 2 injured Americans in open terrain would be easy targets. "Leave me," Hawkins said again. His voice had gotten weaker over the last hour. Blood loss and internal injuries catching up despite Chin's best efforts. "You can make it alone. Send back help. We've had this conversation." Chin got an arm under Hawkins' shoulders, tried to lift. His leg buckled again immediately. Both of them went down. Chin lay there for a moment, tasting dust and defeat. His body had finally hit the wall that will and determination couldn't climb over. Physics had won. Biology had won. Reality had caught up with the crazy intelligence analyst who thought he could be a hero. Hawkins was right. The smart play was leaving him. Chun could make 3 kilometers on one good leg and adrenaline. Could send back a proper rescue team with equipment and training. Could save his own life and maybe Hawkins too. The sat phone was still in his pocket. Still charged. Still connecting him to a world where professional soldiers made professional decisions and nobody expected clerks to carry wounded sergeants through hostile mountains. Chin pulled it out, stared at it in the growing light. His thumb hovered over the power button. "You were right," Chin said quietly. "Back in the cave. I came out here to prove something. To myself, maybe, that I wasn't the coward who let his brother die. That I could be the person who acts instead of hides. So you proved it." Hawkins coughed, the sound wet. "You got me out of that cave alive. Killed 7 Taliban. Carried me 6 kilometers. Nobody's going to call you a coward after this. Except me." Chin put the phone away. "Because if I call for help now, I'll know I quit when it got hard. That when it really mattered, I still wasn't strong enough. You're not making sense." Hawkins' eyes were unfocused. "You're one guy with a busted leg. There's no shame in calling for extraction. There is for me." Chin struggled to his feet again, testing his leg. It held, barely, sending fresh waves of pain up his spine. "Because this isn't about you anymore. It's about whether I can look at myself after and not see David bleeding out while I do nothing." "Chun, that wasn't your fault. You were a kid. I was old enough to act, and I chose not to." Chun got Hawkins positioned across his shoulders again, every movement agony. "I've spent 6 years trying to prove I'm different. Today's the only proof that matters. This is insane. You're going to cripple yourself." "Probably." Chin took a step. His leg held. Took another. Still holding. Better crippled and able to live with myself than whole and knowing I quit. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. You say that like it's a bad thing." Chun fell into a rhythm. Step. Pain. Step. Pain. Step. Pain. The leg would either hold or it wouldn't. His will couldn't change that. But he could keep moving until it made the choice for him. The terrain started to look familiar. Chin recognized rock formations from patrol reports he'd read. They were getting close to the outer perimeter where FOB Zephyr's patrols operated. If they could make it another kilometer, maybe two, they'd be in range of guard towers, visible to friendly forces. His leg gave out again at 2.5 kilometers. Chin went down, managed to roll, so Hawkins took less impact. They ended up in a heap against a boulder, both breathing hard. Okay, Chin admitted. This might be a problem. You think? Hawkins' voice carried dark humor. What's the new plan? Chin looked around. They were in a shallow depression, some cover from observation, but not much. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful if you weren't bleeding and broken in hostile territory. New plan is I drag you, Chin said. Can't carry anymore, but I can drag. That'll take forever. We'll be exposed in full daylight. You have a better idea? Call for help. Hawkins grabbed his vest. Please, Chun. You've proven everything you needed to prove. Don't die out here because you're too proud to ask for rescue. It's not pride. Chun started repositioning Hawkins, getting him into a position that could be dragged. It's knowing that if I quit now, every time I close my eyes for the rest of my life, I'll see David. And I'll know I made the same choice twice. Your brother wouldn't want you to die for him. No, but he'd want me to be the kind of person who doesn't quit on people. Chun grabbed Hawkins' vest straps, started pulling. Even if it cost me everything, the dragging was worse than carrying. Every rock caught Hawkins and jarred his injuries. Every meter took 3 times as long. Chin's hands bled through his gloves. His legs screamed with each step. But they moved forward, and forward was the only direction that mattered. They made maybe 200 meters when Chun heard the sound. Engines. Multiple vehicles. Coming from the south. His first thought was Taliban, but the engine notes were wrong. Too smooth. Too maintained. American vehicles. Chin pulled Hawkins into the shadow of a large boulder, brought his rifle up. Could be friendly. Could be enemy using captured equipment. In this terrain, with visibility improving, assuming anything was dangerous. The vehicles came into view. 2 Humvees moving in tactical formation. American flags on the antennas. Chun felt something in his chest loosen slightly. Friendly forces. Probably a patrol from FOB Zephyr. He started to stand to signal them, then stopped, because if that patrol found them, they'd call it in. Voss would know. The court-martial threat would become real. Chun would be arrested before he made it back to base. And he still had 2 kilometers to go. 2 kilometers he could drag Hawkins if given enough time. 2 kilometers that represented the difference between completing the mission on his own terms and being rescued, like the clerk everyone thought he was. The Humvees were 300 meters out, close enough to see Chun if he revealed himself, far enough that hiding was still possible. Chun looked at Hawkins, at the patrol, at the 2 kilometers of terrain between here and the base. Don't, Hawkins said, reading his intention. Don't hide from them. Call them over. Get us extracted. This is insane. 2 kilometers, Chun said. I can make 2 kilometers. You can barely stand. Your leg's destroyed. You're bleeding. Chun, please. Be smart. I've been smart my whole life. Chun pulled Hawkins deeper into the boulder's shadow, waited for the patrol to pass. Smart is what got me a desk and a security clearance and a life where I don't matter. Today I'm being something else. The Humvees passed within 200 meters, close enough that Chun could see the gunner in the turret scanning the terrain. Close enough that one shout would bring them running. Close enough that it took everything Chun had to stay silent and hidden. The vehicles moved on, continuing their patrol pattern, unaware that 2 of their own were bleeding out in the rocks nearby. Chun watched them disappear around a ridge, then started dragging Hawkins again. You're completely insane, Hawkins said, but his voice carried something that might have been respect, or resignation, or both. Established fact. Chun pulled harder, ignoring the fresh blood on his gloves. 2 kilometers. Then I can be insane and successful. The sun climbed higher. The temperature rose. Chin's world narrowed to the next meter, then the next. Pull. Rest. Pull. Rest. His leg was beyond pain now, sending signals his brain had learned to ignore. His hands were raw meat inside the gloves. His back felt like someone had driven railroad spikes through his spine. He kept moving anyway, because Hawkins needed him to, because David deserved better than the brother who'd failed him, because somewhere in the last 12 hours, Chun had stopped being the quiet analyst who didn't matter and become someone who refused to quit. 1 kilometer to go. The guard towers of FOB Zephyr were visible now, distant but real. Chun could see the wire, could see movement on the walls. So close. Close enough that giving up now would be worse than any failure that came before. His leg gave out completely at 800 meters. Not buckled this time. Just stopped working entirely. Chun tried to stand and couldn't. The muscles had torn, damage too severe to push through. He switched to crawling, dragging Hawkins with one hand while pulling himself forward with the other. Inches at a time now instead of meters. His world contracted to the next handhold, the next pull, the next small victory of forward motion. 500 meters. Chin's vision started to fade at the edges. Blood loss or exhaustion or both. His hands stopped working properly. He could see his fingers moving, but couldn't feel them anymore. 300 meters. The guard towers had spotted them. Chin could hear shouts, see movement, people running, help coming whether he wanted it or not. 100 meters. Chin's arms gave out. He couldn't pull anymore. Couldn't move. Could only lie there in the dust while the world spun and his body shut down systems one by one. Hawkins' hand found his shoulder. You did it, Chun. You got us home. Not yet. Chin's voice was barely a whisper. Still outside the wire. Close enough. Hawkins' grip tightened. Close enough counts. Boots surrounded them. Voices Chin couldn't quite process. Hands lifting Hawkins away. Other hands reaching for Chun. And Lieutenant Okonkwo's voice, urgent and clear. Get them both to medical. Now. And someone find Captain Voss. Tell him Specialist Chun just did the impossible. Chun woke to white ceiling tiles and the smell of antiseptic. His body felt distant, disconnected, like he was observing someone else's pain through thick glass. Morphine, probably. The good kind that made everything soft at the edges. He tried to move. Couldn't. His left leg was immobilized in a brace, elevated on pillows. Both hands were wrapped in thick bandages. And 4-drip fed clear fluid into his arm. Medical monitors beeped steady rhythms that said alive, damaged but alive. Welcome back, a voice said. Chin turned his head, the motion taking more effort than it should. A medic sat beside the bed, young guy Chun vaguely recognized from the aid station. You've been out for 6 hours. How do you feel? Like I got run over by a truck. Chin's voice came out as a croak. His throat felt like sandpaper. Hawkins, is he alive? The medic held up a hand. In surgery right now, but the docs say he'll make it. You got him here in time. Barely, but it counts. Relief hit Chun like a physical force. Made it then. We made it. You made it. The medic's expression shifted to something like awe. 12 kilometers through hostile territory. Killed at least 7 Taliban. Carried a 200-pound man, most of the way with a torn MCL, 3 fractured ribs, and enough lacerations to qualify as a medical disaster. The surgeons are calling it the most insane thing they've seen in 2 deployments. Chin closed his eyes. Insane. That tracked. How bad is the leg? You'll walk again. Might have a limp. Definitely need physical therapy. But the surgeon said if you'd pushed another kilometer, you'd have done permanent damage. As it is, you came about 50 meters from crippling yourself for life. 50 meters. Chin almost laughed. Cutting it close seems to be my specialty. The medic stood, checked the 4. Captain Voss wants to see you as soon as you're conscious. I told him you need rest, but he was pretty insistent. Of course he was. Chin's brief moment of peace evaporated. When? He's outside now. Been waiting for 3 hours. The medic's voice dropped. Look, I don't know what's going on between you two, but half the base is talking about what you did. You're either going to be a hero or in a lot of trouble. Maybe both. Story of my life. Chun shifted slightly, pain breaking through the morphine. Send him in. You sure? I'm sure. Better to get it over with. The medic left. Chin had maybe 30 seconds to prepare himself for whatever was coming. Court-martial. Arrest. Dishonorable discharge. All the consequences Voss had promised. now coming due because Chun had succeeded instead of failing quietly. The door opened. Voss entered, his uniform crisp despite the early hour, his expression unreadable. He pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down, and for a long moment just stared at Chun. "You disobeyed a direct order," Voss said finally. "Left base without authorization. Conducted an unauthorized combat operation in hostile territory. Engaged enemy forces without proper support. Do you have any idea how many regulations you violated?" "No, sir." Chun met his eyes. "Lost count somewhere around 7. This isn't funny, specialist." "No, sir. It's not. But it's done. I broke the rules. I brought Hawkins back alive, and now you get to decide what that cost me." Voss was quiet. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't want to say. Outside the room, footsteps passed in the hallway. A PA system announced something Chun couldn't quite hear. "I should court-martial you," Voss said. "Everything I told you would happen should happen. You set a precedent I can't allow. Soldiers can't just decide which orders matter based on their feelings." "I know, but—" Voss exhaled slowly. "The intelligence you gathered from radio intercepts was accurate. Hawkins was alive. The Taliban were planning to execute him. Your assessment of the tactical situation was correct. Your improvised operation, while reckless, was effective. 7 enemy combatants eliminated. 0 friendly casualties beyond self-inflicted injuries. From a results standpoint, this was a successful mission." Chun said nothing, waited for the other shoe to drop. "The problem is precedent," Voss continued. "If I let this slide, every specialist with a hero complex is going to think they can go rogue when they disagree with orders. That's how units fall apart. That's how people die. So you're going ahead with the court-martial." "I should." Voss leaned back in his chair. "But Lieutenant Okonkwo pointed out something interesting. You didn't technically disobey an order to you specifically. I told her to call the MPs, not you. You left base during approved personal time. The fact that you conducted combat operations during that time is, legally speaking, a gray area. That's the thinnest excuse I've ever heard," Chun said, echoing his own words from their confrontation. "Yes, which is why I'm using it." Voss's expression hardened. "Because what you did was either the stupidest or the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years of service, and I'm not sure which bothers me more. You risked everything for one man. In my position, I have to consider the bigger picture, the whole unit, the mission, and in my position, I had to consider the person." Chen's voice stayed level. "You're right that I set a precedent. But the precedent isn't that soldiers can ignore orders. It's that soldiers take care of their own. That we don't leave people behind. Isn't that supposed to matter?" "It does matter." Voss stood, moved to the window, "which is why this is complicated. Half the company thinks you're a hero. The other half thinks you're a dangerous loose cannon. And I think you're both. You proved you have skills nobody knew about. Combat capability far beyond your MOS. But you also proved you'll disregard authority when you think you know better. I proved I won't let good people die when I can stop it," Chun said quietly. "If that makes me a loose cannon, I can live with that. Can you live with what it cost?" Voss turned back to face him. "You destroyed your leg. Traumatized yourself, killing 7 men. Potentially ended your career. All for one sergeant who, statistically speaking, had maybe a 30% chance of surviving even if you succeeded. Was it worth it?" Chun didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Why?" Voss moved closer, genuine curiosity in his voice now. "I need to understand. What makes one life worth risking everything?" Chun thought about David, about Oakland, about every fight he'd ever walked in and knowing the odds were bad, about the choice between being safe and being able to look at himself in the mirror. "Because 6 years ago, I watched my brother die while I did nothing," Chun said. "I was too scared to help, too weak to matter. He bled out on a street corner while I hid in our apartment. I've spent every day since trying to prove I'm different. That when it matters, I'm the person who acts. Hawkins gave me a chance to prove that. So yeah, it was worth it, even if it cost me everything." Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Your brother, the one you mentioned in your enlistment interview. The reason you joined." "Yes, sir. I read your file after you left yesterday. Saw the Oakland police reports. The foster care records. I thought I understood who you were." Voss's voice softened slightly. I was wrong. You're not a clerk who got lucky. You're a fighter who's been pretending to be a clerk. I wasn't pretending. Chen met his eyes. I wanted to be different than what Oakland made me. The army was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to be better, and instead you ended up being exactly what you always were. A survivor who does whatever it takes. Is that a bad thing? I don't know yet. Voss pulled out a folder from under his arm, dropped it on the bed beside Chun. That's a transfer request. Lieutenant Okonkwo filed it this morning. She wants you for her platoon. Says you've got infantry instincts, and they're wasted behind a desk. I'm an intelligence analyst. You're a soldier who happens to have intelligence training. Voss tapped the folder. There's a difference. The question is whether you want to make it official. Infantry MOS, real training. Proper integration of your skills into doctrine instead of improvisation. Chun stared at the folder. Everything he'd wanted when he first tried to transfer. The chance to be more than the quiet clerk everyone forgot. Recognition that he could be useful beyond a desk and a computer. And the court-martial? Chun asked. Goes away if you accept the transfer. Voss's voice went hard again. But understand what you're agreeing to. Infantry means following orders. Means trusting the chain of command. Means not going rogue every time you disagree with tactical decisions. Can you do that? Honestly? Chun said. I don't know. Today proved I'm willing to disobey when I think I'm right. That's not going to change. Fair answer. Voss moved toward the door. Which is why if you take this transfer, you're going to be watched closely. One more unauthorized operation. One more instance of ignoring orders, and the court-martial comes back. Understood? Understood. Good. Voss paused at the door. For what it's worth, Chun, what you did was remarkable. Stupid, reckless, and remarkable. Hawkins is alive because you refuse to quit. That matters, even if it complicates everything. He left. Chun lay in the hospital bed, staring at the transfer request, trying to process everything. His body was wrecked. His future was uncertain. He'd killed 7 men and would have to carry that weight forever. But Hawkins was alive, and Chun had proven, at least to himself, that he wasn't the coward who'd let David die. That when it mattered, he'd chosen courage over safety. The door opened again. Morrison entered, followed by Reeves. The armorer looked like he hadn't slept, his expression somewhere between relief and exasperation. You're insane, Morrison said without preamble. Completely, utterly insane. So I've been told. Chun managed a weak smile. Thanks for the equipment. Worked exactly like it should. You weren't supposed to actually use it to start a war. Morrison dropped into the chair Voss had vacated. I gave you that rifle thinking you'd realize how stupid this was and turn back. Instead, you killed half a Taliban cell and dragged Hawkins through 12 kilometers of hell. He would have done it for me. I know. Morrison's voice softened. That's why I helped. Couldn't let the only NCO with sense die alone when someone was willing to try. Even if that someone was a 100-pound analyst with delusions of being Rambo. 140, Chun corrected. And I was never trying to be Rambo. Just trying to be someone who doesn't quit on people. Well, you succeeded. Reeves stepped forward, her young face serious. The whole company knows what you did. They're calling it the craziest rescue in base history. You're either going to be famous or infamous. Possibly both. I vote infamous, Chun said. Fame sounds exhausting. Too late. Morrison stood. Words already spreading beyond the company. By tomorrow, the whole FOB will know. By next week, probably the whole theater. The story's too good. One analyst versus an entire Taliban cell. Brings back a sergeant, declared Kia. It's the kind of thing that becomes legend. Or cautionary tale. That too. Morrison moved toward the door. Get some rest, Chun. You earned it. And when you're healed up, we need to talk about your training. Because you clearly learned to fight somewhere the army doesn't know about. And that's intel worth having. They left. Chun closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him despite the morphine keeping pain at bay. His body needed sleep. His mind needed processing time. The consequences were still coming, the full weight of what he'd done still settling. But in that moment, lying in a hospital bed with a destroyed leg and bloody hands and a future full of complications, Chun felt something he hadn't felt in 6 years. Peace. 3 days later, Chen was still in the hospital bed when the commanding officer of FOB Zephyr walked through the door. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone was a veteran of 3 deployments, a man whose reputation preceded him like weather. Fair, but exacting. Demanding, but loyal to his soldiers. The kind of commander who knew every name in his battalion and most of their stories. He pulled up a chair beside Chen's bed without asking, his presence filling the small room. "Specialist Chun," Stone said. His voice carried the gravel of someone who'd spent years shouting orders over gunfire. "I've read the after-action reports. All 7 of them. Each one describes your unauthorized operation differently, but they all agree on the basic facts. You went in a hostile territory alone, engaged a superior enemy force, and extracted a wounded soldier, declared Kia. That about sum it up?" "Yes, sir." Stone was quiet for a moment, studying Chun with the kind of intensity that made you check your uniform for defects, even when lying in a hospital bed. "I've been commanding soldiers for 22 years, Stone said finally. "In that time, I've seen a lot of crazy things. Brave things, stupid things. Usually they're the same thing looked at from different angles. What you did falls into a category I've only seen maybe 3 times. Act so far outside normal parameters that they redefine what's possible." Chin said nothing, waiting. "Captain Voss wants to court-martial you. Lieutenant Okonkwo wants to promote you. Master Sergeant Morrison wants to recruit you for Special Forces selection. The chaplain wants to make sure you're mentally sound. And Sergeant Hawkins, when he woke up yesterday, asked if you were okay before asking about his own injuries." Stone leaned back. "So I'm here to figure out which of these responses is appropriate." "What do you think is appropriate?" "Sir, I think you're a problem I don't know how to solve." Stone's expression didn't change. "You violated every protocol we have, disobeyed orders, conducted unauthorized combat operations, set a precedent that could undermine unit cohesion. If I let this slide, what message does that send? That results matter more than process?" Stone almost smiled. "Dangerous philosophy for a military organization. We run on process, on chain of command, on the fundamental principle that soldiers follow orders even when they disagree. You threw that out the window." "I did what needed to be done," Chin said. "If that makes me a problem, I can accept that." "Can you?" Stone leaned forward. "Because accepting consequences is easy when you're high on morphine and everyone's calling you a hero. It gets harder when the consequences actually hit. When the paperwork starts, when your career gets complicated by the fact that you're both a success story and a disciplinary case." "I'm aware, sir." "Are you?" Stone pulled out a tablet, tapped the screen. "I have a message here from CENTCOM. They heard about your operation. Word travels fast when something this unusual happens. They want a full briefing on how an intelligence analyst successfully conducted a solo rescue operation that a properly equipped team would have struggled with." Chin's stomach tightened. "That sounds like the beginning of an investigation, or the beginning of recognizing that we've been wasting your skills." Stone set down the tablet. "Your service record shows average performance as an analyst. Competent but unremarkable. No flags, no problems, no indicators that you were capable of what you did. Which raises questions. Like where did you learn to fight? Where did you learn tactical movement? Where did you develop the mental discipline to kill 7 enemy combatants without hesitation?" Stone's voice went quiet. "The Army didn't teach you that, Chun. Not in analyst school. So where did it come from?" "Oakland." Chun met his eyes. "Underground fighting circuit. 3 years before I enlisted. I learned to survive in places where the only rule was don't lose." Stone nodded slowly, unsurprised. "I suspected something like that. Your movements in the tactical footage, the way you approached the cave system, the efficiency of your engagement. That's not book learning. That's experience. The violent kind." "Yes, sir." "And you've been hiding it since enlistment. Pretending to be someone you're not." "I wasn't pretending." Chin's voice carried an edge now. "I was trying to be better than what Oakland made me. The Army was supposed to be different. A chance to use my brain instead of my fists. Noble goal." Stone stood, moved to the window. "But you can't separate yourself from your capabilities. You brought all that Oakland training with you whether you wanted to or not. It just took the right situation to bring it out. Or the wrong situation. Depends on your perspective." Stone turned back. From where I'm sitting, we have a soldier with unique skills who's been underutilized for 2 years. Skills that saved a life and eliminated enemy combatants. That's an asset, not a problem. Captain Voss thinks I'm a liability. Captain Voss thinks in terms of regulations and precedent. I think in terms of mission effectiveness. Stone returned to the chair. Here's what's going to happen. The court-martial threat goes away. In exchange, you accept the infantry transfer Lieutenant Okonkwo requested. You also submit to a full psychological evaluation to ensure you're fit for continued service. And if I'm not, then we find you a different role. Maybe training, maybe something else. But we don't waste what you've proven you can do. Stone's expression hardened. However, understand this clearly. You get one free pass. One time where your results outweigh your insubordination. Pull something like this again, and I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your enlistment breaking rocks at Leavenworth. Clear? Crystal, sir. Good. Stone stood. Hawkins wants to see you. He's 2 doors down. Doctors say he's stable enough for visitors. I suggest you go talk to him when you're mobile. He has things to say. The colonel left. Chun lay there processing what had just happened. No corps martial. Infantry transfer approved. Psychological evaluation pending. He'd gambled everything and somehow won, but the win came with conditions and scrutiny that would follow him for the rest of his career. The door opened again. A medic entered, younger than the one from before. Ready to try walking? She asked. Doctor says you can start physical therapy if you're up for it. Chun nodded. Help me up. The process of getting vertical was excruciating. His legs screamed protest, even through the medication. The brace held, but barely. Chun gripped the medic's shoulder, found his balance, took an experimental step. Pain shot through his knee like lightning. He nearly went down. The medic caught him. Easy. She guided him to a walker. You tore your MCL pretty badly. Full recovery is going to take months. Maybe longer. Can I walk to Hawkins' room? Technically, yes. Should you? Probably not. She studied him. But something tells me you're going to anyway. Correct. She sighed, helped him position the walker. 2 doors down. Take it slow. If you fall and re-injure yourself, the surgeon is going to be extremely unhappy with both of us. Chun made it to the hallway, each step a negotiation between will and biology. The walker helped, but his leg was barely cooperating. Other patients and medical staff watched him pass, some with curiosity, others with recognition. Word had spread. Everyone knew who he was now, the analyst who'd gone to war alone. Hawkins' room was exactly 2 doors down, just like Stone had said. Chun paused at the entrance, suddenly uncertain. What did you say to someone you'd carried through 12 kilometers of hell? Thanks for not dying didn't quite cover it. He pushed the door open. Hawkins lay in a bed similar to Chen's, even more monitors and tubes. His face was still swollen from the beating, but his eyes were clear and alert. When he saw Chun, something like relief crossed his features. Chun. He tried to sit up, winced, settled back. They told me you were okay, but seeing it is different. Could say the same about you. Chun navigated the walker to the bedside chair, lowered himself carefully. Doctors say you'll make a full recovery. Thanks to you. Hawkins' voice was rough. They told me what you did. All of it. The cave assault, carrying me 12 kilometers, refusing extraction. Chun, that's insane. You could have died a dozen times. But I didn't. That's not the point. Hawkins shook his head. The point is you risked everything for me. Your career, your life, your future. I don't know how to process that. How to say thank you for something that big. You already did. Chun leaned back in the chair. 2 years ago, when everyone else at this base treated me like furniture, you treated me like a person. You sat with me, talked to me, made me feel like I mattered. That's worth more than you know. That's just basic decency. Maybe. But basic decency is rare enough that when someone shows it, it matters. Chen's voice went quiet. You gave me something nobody else did. Respect. Recognition. A reason to believe I could be more than what everyone assumed. So when you needed help, there was no question. I owed you that much. You didn't owe me anything. I did. Because you're the reason I knew I could do it. You saw something in me that I'd stopped seeing in myself. That quiet comment about me having soldier's instincts, about being wasted behind a desk. You have no idea how much that meant. Hawkins was quiet for a moment. His hand moved toward Chun, stopped halfway, settled on the bed. I called Michelle yesterday. Told her what happened. She wants to meet you when we get home. Says she needs to thank the person who brought me back to our daughters. You don't have to. I do. Hawkins' voice firmed. You gave them their father back. You gave me a future I thought was over. That deserves recognition. Deserves more than just a handshake and some paperwork. The recognition I need is knowing you're alive. She met his eyes. That's enough. It's not, but I'll accept it for now. Hawkins shifted slightly. What are you going to do now? Take the infantry transfer? Probably. Chin glanced at his destroyed leg. If they'll still have me after I heal up. Might not be fit for duty anymore. You'll be fit. Hawkins' confidence was absolute. I've seen you push through impossible. A torn MCL is nothing compared to carrying my heavy ass through the mountains. You'll recover. Question is whether you want to. What do you mean? Infantry is different than intel. More danger, more pressure, more opportunities to do what you did, but with authorization. Hawkins watched him carefully. Is that what you want? Or was this a one-time thing? Proving a point to yourself? Chun considered the question. Thought about Oakland, about David, about the choice between safety and being able to live with himself. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to go back to being invisible. Back to the desk, where nobody expects anything. But another part knows that's not possible anymore. I've seen what I'm capable of. Can't unsee that. No, you can't. Hawkins' expression was understanding. So you figure out how to live with it. How to be the person who can do terrible things when necessary, but doesn't become the terrible things. That's the hard part. The fighting's easy compared to staying human after. How do you do it? I remember what I'm fighting for. Hawkins glanced at a photo on his bedside table. Michelle and the girls. My daughters get to grow up in a world that's a little safer because of what we do here. That's worth carrying the weight. Chin nodded slowly. Maybe that's enough. They sat in companionable silence for a while. Two soldiers who'd survived the impossible, both trying to figure out what came next. Outside, the base continued its operations. Patrols departed. Helicopters landed. The war went on, indifferent to individual stories of survival. Eventually, a nurse came to check Hawkins' vitals and suggested Chin should rest. He made his slow way back to his room, each step easier than the one before. The leg was learning to cooperate again. The body was remembering how to function despite damage. Chin settled back into his bed, exhausted from the short walk. His future was uncertain. His career was complicated. His body was broken in ways that would take months to heal. But Hawkins was alive. And Chun had proven, at least to himself, that when it mattered most, he was the person who acted instead of hiding. That would have to be enough. 2 weeks later, Chun sat in the base psychologist's office, leg brace still in place, but walking without the walker now. The room was designed to be calming. Neutral colors, soft lighting, a couch that was trying too hard to look comfortable. None of it worked. Chun felt exposed in a way that 12 kilometers through hostile territory hadn't managed. Captain Sarah Brennan sat across from him, notepad in hand, but not writing. She was maybe 40, with the kind of face that had seen enough soldiers to recognize patterns Chun didn't know he was showing. This is your third session, she said. We've covered your childhood, your brother's death, your time in Oakland. Today I want to talk about what happened in those mountains. Specifically, what you felt when you killed those 7 men. Shouldn't have been expecting this question. Had prepared answers. Professional. Clinical. The kind of thing that would check boxes on evaluation forms. But sitting there under Brennan's patient gaze, the prepared answers fell hollow. I felt efficient, Chin said finally. Like I was solving a problem. Target acquisition, threat assessment, engagement, move to next target. No hositashchen. No guilt. Just execution. And that concerns you. It should concern everyone. Chun leaned forward. Normal people feel something when they kill. Horror, guilt, trauma. I felt like I was back in Oakland, putting down opponents who got in my way. That's not healthy. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Did you enjoy it? No. The answer came quickly. It wasn't about enjoyment. It was about necessity. They were going to kill Hawkins. I stopped them. The method was irrelevant. But you recognize the efficiency, the lack of hesitation. That's what scares you. Chin nodded. Because it means the violence didn't bother me. Which means maybe I'm broken in ways the army doesn't need. Or maybe you're exactly what the army needs in specific situations. Brennan set down her notepad. Chun, you're not the first soldier I've evaluated who has a complicated relationship with violence. Special operations, infantry, anyone who sees regular combat, they all develop mechanisms to compartmentalize, to separate the act from the emotion so they can function in crisis. This wasn't compartmentalizing. This was being comfortable with killing. Was it? Brennan leaned back. Tell me about the moment before you fired the first shot. In the cave, when you saw them about to execute Hawkins. What did you feel then? Terror. Chun closed his eyes, remembering. Absolute terror that I was about to watch another person I cared about die, while I did nothing. That'd be David all over again, bleeding out while I hid. So the killing wasn't comfortable. It was necessary to prevent a terror you'd experienced before. Chun opened his eyes. That's a generous interpretation. It's an accurate one. Brennan picked up her notepad again, made a brief notation. You're not a psychopath, Chun. Psychopaths don't risk everything to save others. They don't carry wounded men through mountains. They don't spend 6 years trying to become better than their worst moment. You're a trauma survivor who develops survival skills that happen to translate to combat effectiveness. That sounds like you're clearing me for duty. I'm saying you're fit to serve. Whether that's in infantry, intelligence, or somewhere else is a command decision. But from a psychological standpoint, you're not broken. You're adapted. Brennan met his eyes. The question is whether you can live with what you're adapted to do. I don't know, Chun admitted. Every night since the mountains, I dream about those 7 men. Not nightmares exactly, just replays. Clinical assessments of how I could have been more efficient, how I could have eliminated threats faster. It's like my brain is studying my own violence to get better at it. That's concerning, but not disqualifying. Brennan made another note. Many soldiers experience similar patterns. The brain processes trauma through repetition, trying to find patterns that improve survival. What matters is whether it's consuming you or whether you can function despite it. I can function. Can you function without it? Brennan's question was sharp. If you transfer to infantry, you're committing to more situations where this efficiency will be required. More violence, more killing. Can you handle that becoming your normal instead of your exception? Chun was quiet. The question cut to something he'd been avoiding. He'd proven he could kill when necessary. But did he want to make that his profession? Turn his darkest capabilities into his primary skill set? I don't know, he said finally. Part of me wants to go back to intelligence. Back to the desk where the violence is abstract. Numbers and targets on screens instead of faces I remember. But another part knows I can't unknow what I'm capable of. Can't pretend I'm just a clerk anymore. You don't have to be just anything. Brennan's voice softened. You could be a soldier with intelligence training who's also capable in combat. That's valuable. Rare, actually. Most people specialize. You've proven you can operate across domains. At what cost? At the cost of complexity, of living with contradictions, of being someone who can analyze threats from a desk and eliminate them in person when required. Brennan set down her notepad. I'm going to clear you for duty, Chun. Full clearance. But I'm also recommending ongoing counseling. Not because you're broken, but because what you're capable of requires regular checking in. Making sure you stay connected to why you do it instead of just how efficiently you can. Fair enough. Chun stood, testing his leg. The brace held. The pain was manageable. When can I return to active duty? Physical therapy says another 4 weeks minimum. After that, it's up to your commanding officer. Brennan stood as well. For what it's worth, Chun, what you did in those mountains was extraordinary. Not many people could have pulled it off. Even fewer would have tried. Don't let the method overshadow the meaning. Chun left the office, her words following him into the Afghan afternoon. The base had changed in the 2 weeks since his return. Or maybe he'd changed and was seeing it differently. Soldiers nodded to him in passing. Some stopped to shake his hand. Others just watched with expressions that ranged from respect to wariness. He was famous now, the analyst who'd gone to war. The story had spread beyond FOB Zephyr, picked up by Stars and Stripes. mentioned in briefings, becoming the kind of tale that soldiers told when they needed to believe impossible things could happen. Chun hated it. The attention made him uncomfortable in ways that combat hadn't. He couldn't hide anymore, couldn't be invisible. Everyone knew who he was and what he'd done, and their expectations pressed on him like physical weight. He found Morrison in the armory, cataloging weapons like always. The sergeant looked up, broke into a rare smile. Chun, looking more mobile every day. Getting there. Chun leaned against a workbench. Brennan cleared me for duty. I heard. Morrison set down the rifle he'd been inspecting. Also heard your infantry transfer got approved. Lieutenant Okonkwo's already planning where to slot you in her platoon. About that, Chun hesitated. I'm not sure I should take it. Morrison's expression shifted to something like concern. Why not? You've proven you can handle infantry work. Better than most, actually. That's the problem. Chen's voice was quiet. I'm too comfortable with it. The killing, the violence. It doesn't bother me the way it should. If I transfer to infantry, I'm committing to more of that, making it my identity instead of my exception. And you think staying in intelligence is safer? Emotionally? Maybe. Chen shrugged. At least behind a desk. I'm not putting myself in positions where I have to become what Oakland made me. You're going to be that person regardless of your MOS. Morrison crosses arms. The difference is whether you have training and support or whether you're improvising like you did in the mountains. Infantry gives you structure, doctrine, a team. That's better than going lone wolf every time something goes wrong, or it's normalizing something that should stay abnormal. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled something from his desk drawer, a folder worn at the edges. He handed it to Chun. What's this? My psych eval from 12 years ago. After my second deployment. Morrison watched Chun open it. I had similar concerns. Worried I was too comfortable with violence. Too good at killing. Thought maybe I should transfer to something safer. What changed your mind? Read the recommendation at the bottom. Chun found the passage. The evaluating psychologist had written, Sergeant Morrison's comfort with violence in combat situations is not pathology, but professionalism. His concern about this comfort demonstrates maintained humanity. Recommend continued service with ongoing evaluation. You stayed, Chun said. I stayed. Because someone pointed out that being good at violence isn't the same as enjoying it. That professional competence in combat is different than being a psychopath. Morrison took the folder back. You're worried you're broken, Chun. But broken people don't carry wounded sergeants through mountains. They don't risk everything to save others. You're not broken. You're just effective in ways that make you uncomfortable. And if I get too comfortable, if I start to like it, then the counseling catches it. The team catches it. You catch it yourself because you're aware enough to worry. Morrison's voice firmed. Take the transfer, Chun. Okonkwo's platoon needs someone with your skills. And you need a place where what you're capable of is valued instead of hidden. Chun nodded slowly. Okay, I'll take it. Good. Morrison returned to his weapon inspection. Report to Okonkwo tomorrow. She's got training plans that'll make you regret surviving those mountains. Chun left the armory and headed toward the operations center. His leg was getting stronger daily. His body was healing. The psychological evaluation was complete. The transfer was approved. Everything was moving forward toward a future he'd been too scared to want before the mountains. Lieutenant Okonkwo was at her desk when Chun found her, reviewing mission reports. She looked up, gestured for him to sit. Chun, good timing. I was about to send for you. Morrison said you wanted to see me. I want to give you this. She handed him a small case. Chun opened it, found a combat infantry badge inside. The CIB was reserved for infantry soldiers who'd engaged in ground combat. Chun wasn't infantry, wasn't authorized to wear it. I can't accept this, Chun said. I'm not qualified. Not yet, but you will be. Okonkwo smiled. Considerate motivation. In 6 weeks, when you're fully healed and transferred, you'll have earned it properly. Until then, it's a reminder of what you've already proven you can do. Chun stared at the badge. The crossed rifles on blue meant something in the army. Recognition, belonging, the acknowledgement that you'd been tested and survived. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. Okonkwo's smile turned sharp. I'm going to work you harder than anyone in this platoon. You've got raw talent and improvised skills. I'm going to turn that into professional competence. It's going to be miserable. Looking forward to it. Liar. But I appreciate the attitude. Okonkwo stood, extended her hand. Welcome to the infantry, Chun. Try not to do anything crazy for at least a month. Chun shook her hand, felt the weight of commitment settle. He'd made his choice. Infantry. Kumba. A future where his darkest capabilities would be his primary tools. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt right. Like he was finally becoming who he'd been trying to be all along. 6 weeks after the mountains, Chun stood in formation without the leg brace for the first time. His knee ached, would probably always ache, but it held his weight. The physical therapist had called his recovery remarkable. Chun called it necessity. Infantry training started in 3 days, and he refused to show up as anything less than fully functional. The formation was unusual. Full company assembly at 0900. Dress uniforms instead of combat gear. Lieutenant Colonel Stone presiding instead of the usual company commander. Chun stood in the front rank next to Hawkins, who'd been released from medical care 2 weeks earlier. The sergeant's face still showed faint bruising, but he stood tall, his presence a testament to survival against odds. Company, attention, the first sergeant barked. 200 soldiers snapped to position as one. Stone stepped forward, his dress uniform crisp despite the heat. Behind him, Captain Voss stood at parade rest, expression carefully neutral. Lieutenant Okonkwo was there too, along with Morrison and several other NCOs Chun recognized. We're here today to recognize extraordinary actions conducted under exceptional circumstances, Stone began, his voice carrying across the formation. 6 weeks ago, Specialist Marcus Chun conducted an unauthorized rescue operation that resulted in the recovery of Sergeant First Class Dale Hawkins and the elimination of 7 enemy combatants. This operation violated protocol, defied orders, and succeeded against overwhelming odds. Chun felt 200 pairs of eyes on him. His collar felt too tight. The sun was too bright. He wanted to be anywhere but the center of this much attention. The Army has specific regulations regarding unauthorized combat operations, Stone continued. Specialist Chun violated most of them. He also demonstrated initiative, tactical acumen, and personal courage that exemplifies the best traditions of our service, which presents a command challenge. How do we recognize excellence while maintaining discipline? The question hung in the air. Chun could see soldiers shifting, uncertain where this was heading. Was this a commendation or a court-martial? Recognition or warning? The solution, Stone said, is to acknowledge both. The risks Specialist Chun took were unacceptable. The results he achieved were exceptional. Therefore, we mark this moment with both recognition and correction. First Sergeant. The first sergeant stepped forward, carrying a small wooden case. Stone opened it, revealing a bronze star medal with Valor device. For actions above and beyond the call of duty, Stone said, removing the medal. For selfless service in the face of enemy fire. For refusing to abandon a fellow soldier. For demonstrating the courage we ask of our finest warriors. Specialist Marcus Chun, you are hereby awarded the Bronze Star Medal. He pinned the medal to Chun's chest. The weight was negligible, but Chun felt it like an anchor. Recognition he'd never expected. Honor he wasn't sure he deserved. However, Stone's voice hardened. For violation of protocol and disobedience of standing orders, you are also hereby issued a formal letter of reprimand. This letter will remain in your permanent file as a reminder that courage does not excuse insubordination. Do you understand, Specialist? Yes, sir. Chen's voice stayed steady. Good. Stone stepped back. Let this serve as precedent. We value initiative and courage. We also value discipline and respect for chain of command. Specialist Chun succeeded because he possessed both the skills to execute and the judgment to apply them. Had he failed, we would be mourning losses instead of celebrating recovery. The line between hero and cautionary tale is often just outcome. Stone turned to face the full formation. Let me be clear to all of you. What Specialist Chun did was extraordinary. It is not to be emulated. If you find yourself in a situation where you believe unauthorized action is necessary, you exhaust every official channel first. You consult your chain of command. You follow protocol. Specialist Chun is being recognized despite his methods, not because of them. Understood? Yes, sir, 200 voices answered. Dismissed. The formation broke. Soldiers approached Chun, some to congratulate, others just to see the medal up close. Chun accepted their words with quiet thanks, but his attention was on Hawkins, who'd stepped aside to let others through. When the crowd thinned, Hawkins moved closer. Bronze Star. That's significant. So's the letter of reprimand. True. Hawkins smiled slightly. But one's going in a display case, the other's going in a file nobody looks at. Stone made his point about discipline, but he also made it clear what he really values. I'm still not sure I deserve this. Chun touched the medal. 7 men died. I destroyed my leg. We barely made it back. But we did make it back. Hawkins' voice was firm, and those 7 men were about to execute a prisoner and probably kill more Americans after. You stop that. The medal recognizes reality, not your doubts about it. Chun nodded, accepting if not fully believing. Captain Voss approached, his expression unreadable. Specialist Chun. A word. They stepped away from the crowd. Voss was quiet for a moment, studying the medal on Chun's chest. I fought this, Voss said finally. Argued that recognizing your actions would encourage similar violations. Lieutenant Colonel Stone overruled me. Said precedent matters less than outcome in exceptional cases. And you disagree, sir? I did. Voss met his eyes. But I'm beginning to think I was wrong. What you did shouldn't be possible. One analyst against an enemy cell, succeeding where a properly equipped team would struggle. It defies tactical logic, which means maybe my understanding of tactical logic is incomplete. Sir, let me finish. Voss's voice carried something Chun had never heard from him before. Respect, maybe, or at least acknowledgement. You prove that unconventional approaches can succeed when conventional wisdom says they'll fail. That's valuable. More valuable than I wanted to admit. So while I still believe you violated protocol, I also believe the Army needs soldiers who can think beyond protocol when necessary. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Voss almost smiled. Lieutenant Okonkwo tells me you're starting infantry training next week. I'll be observing portions of it, making sure your unconventional skills translate to conventional doctrine. If they don't, we'll find another role for you. Understood. Good. Voss turned to leave, paused. Chun, for what it's worth, I'm glad you succeeded. Hawkins is a good soldier. Would have been a waste to lose him. He walked away. Chun stood there processing the conversation. Voss had essentially admitted he'd been wrong, which for a captain of his temperament was equivalent to a full apology. The crowd had mostly dispersed. Chun found himself alone with Hawkins and Morrison, the 3 of them standing in the shade of a supply building. While Morrison said, "You're officially a Bronze Star recipient in a disciplinary case. How's it feel?" Complicated. Chun leaned against the building, taking weight off his healing knee. Like I'm being pulled in different directions. Recognized and reprimanded. Valued and warned. Welcome to the Army, Morrison said, where nothing is simple and everyone has opinions about what you should have done differently. At least nobody's calling me just a clerk anymore, Chun offered. No, now they're calling you the crazy analyst who started a one-man war. Hawkins' tone was light. Much better. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the base continue its operations. A convoy prepared to depart. Helicopters landed and lifted. The war went on, caring nothing for individual ceremonies or medals or the complicated feelings of soldiers trying to figure out their place in it. Michelle wants to meet you, Hawkins said suddenly. When we rotate back stateside, she's planning a dinner. Says it's the least she can do for the person who brought me home. That's not necessary. It absolutely is. Hawkins' voice left no room for argument. You gave my daughters their father back. That deserves more than a handshake and a medal. It deserves being part of our family, if you'll accept that. Chun felt something catch in his throat. Family was a concept he'd barely understood since David died. Foster care had given him shelter, but not belonging. The Army had given him purpose, but not connection. The idea of being welcomed into Hawkins' family of mattering to people beyond his utility was almost overwhelming. I like that, Chen managed. Good. Hawkins clapped his shoulder. Fair warning, my daughters are going to ask you a million questions about Afghanistan and rescues and being a hero. Michelle's already told them a sanitized version. They think you're basically Captain America. I'm definitely not Captain America. Tell them that. They won't believe you. Hawkins' smile faded to something more serious. Chun, I know you struggle with what you did. The killing, the violence. But from where I'm sitting, you used terrible skills for the best possible reason. To save a life. That matters. Don't let the method overshadow the meaning. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. Morrison stepped in. You're going to carry those 7 kills for the rest of your life. That's unavoidable. But you also get to carry the knowledge that Hawkins is alive, his family is whole, and you prove you're not the person who hid while your brother died. That's worth carrying too. Chen nodded slowly. The weight of both truths settled on him like the bronze star on his chest. Heavy but earned. Complicated but real. I should get to physical therapy, Chen said. Got to keep the knee functional if I'm starting infantry training. How's it feeling? Hawkins asked. Like it'll hold. Chen tested it. Won't ever be 100%, but it'll do what I need it to do. That's all any of us can offer. Morrison headed back toward the armory, doing what needs to be done with what we have. You've already proven you excel at that. Chen walked toward the physical therapy building, his leg protesting but functional. The base felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because his relationship to it had transformed. He wasn't invisible anymore. Wasn't just the quiet analyst everyone forgot. He was Specialist Chun, Bronze Star recipient. Infantry transferee. The soldier who'd gone to war alone and brought someone home. The analyst who'd proven that sometimes the most unlikely people did the most impossible things. The physical therapist put him through exercises that made his knee scream. Chun pushed through anyway, cataloging pain and capability, learning his new limits. The leg would never be what it was, but it would be enough. After therapy, Chun returned to his CHU and found a letter waiting. Official Army envelope, forwarding address from Oakland. He opened it carefully. The letter was from his old foster mother, Mrs. Chun, the woman who'd taken him in after his parents died and kept him through David's death and his darkest years. She wrote in careful handwriting that she'd seen his name mentioned in a military newsletter, that she heard about his medal, that she was proud of him. David will be proud too, she wrote. You became the person he always believed you could be. The person who acts instead of hides. The person who saves instead of watches. You'd be so proud, Marcus. I hope you know that. Chun read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in his footlocker next to the combat infantry badge Okonkwo had given him. Reminders. Anchors. Pieces of a life that was finally becoming something he could accept. He had 3 days until infantry training started. 3 days to prepare physically and mentally for the next phase. 3 days to reconcile who he'd been with who he was becoming. Chun spent them training, reading doctrine, and visiting Hawkins when schedules allowed, building toward a future that terrified and excited him in equal measure. On the final night before training began, Chun sat outside his CHU and looked at the Afghan stars. The same stars that had watched him carry Hawkins through the mountains. The same sky that had covered impossible choices and unlikely survival. Somewhere in Oakland, David's grave sat under different stars. Chun hadn't visited since the funeral, hadn't been able to face the reminder of his failure. Maybe when he rotated home, he'd finally go, tell his brother about the mountains, about becoming someone David would have been proud of, about finding a way to live with both his capabilities and his humanity. Not yet, though. First came infantry training, then deployment, then whatever came after. Chun touched the bronze star on his dress uniform, hanging inside the CHU. The weight of recognition, the burden of expectations, the proof that he'd succeeded at something everyone said was impossible. Tomorrow, he'd start learning how to do it again, properly this time, with training and support and a team instead of desperation and improvisation. But tonight, he allowed himself to just be, to exist in the space between who he'd been and who he was becoming, to accept that both versions mattered, Both had value. Both were necessary parts of becoming whole. The stars offered no answers, but they witnessed, and sometimes witnessing was enough. 3 months later, Chun stood in Lieutenant Okonkwo's platoon formation wearing full infantry gear instead of analyst utilities. The transformation was complete. His MOS had officially changed. His duty assignment had shifted. The quiet clerk who'd spent 2 years behind a computer now carried a rifle and tactical responsibility alongside soldiers who'd accepted him as one of their own. The leg held. Not perfectly, but well enough. Chun had pushed through physical therapy with the same stubborn refusal to quit that had carried him through the mountains. The doctor said he'd always have a slight limp, especially when tired. Chun considered it a reasonable price. Infantry training had been everything Okonkwo promised. Brutal, exhausting, comprehensive. She'd taken his raw skills and improvised tactics and hammered them into proper doctrine. Taught him to operate as part of a team instead of alone. Showed him the difference between desperate survival and professional competence. Chun had excelled, not because the training was easy, but because he understood the stakes. Because he'd already seen what happened when you improvised without backup, when you operated beyond your capabilities, when you pushed yourself past every reasonable limit. The other soldiers in the platoon had treated him with cautious respect at first. Everyone knew his story. The analyst who'd gone rogue. The Bronze Star recipient with a letter of reprimand. The soldier who'd done the impossible and paid for it with a destroyed knee and complicated reputation. But respect earned through reputation was fragile. Chun had to prove himself again, this time as infantry instead of anomaly. He did it through consistent performance, through being reliable, through showing that his mountain rescue wasn't luck, but capability he could apply within doctrine. Slowly, the wariness faded. He became Chun the infantryman instead of Chun the crazy analyst. Still unusual, still carrying his history, but integrated. Accepted. Part of the team. All right, listen up, Okonkwo said, bringing the platoon to attention. We've got patrol rotation starting tomorrow. Chun, you're with second squad. Morrison's leading. Standard sector sweep, but intel suggests increased activity near the northeast ridgeline. Chun nodded. The northeast ridgeline was familiar territory. He'd crossed it carrying Hawkins. Had studied it for 2 years from satellite photos. Knew every approach and weak point. The irony of being sent there as an official infantry soldier instead of unauthorized rescuer wasn't lost on him. Something funny. Chun? Okonkwo had caught his expression. No, ma'am. Just recognizing the terrain. I know. That's why you're going. Your knowledge of that area is valuable. Use it properly this time, with backup and authorization. Yes, ma'am. The formation dismissed. Chun headed to the armory to check out equipment for tomorrow's patrol. Morrison was already there, preparing his own gear with the methodical precision Chun had come to expect. Northeast ridgeline, Morrison said without looking up. Where you carried Hawkins out. Going to be strange going back there as official ops. Already thinking about it. Chun started checking magazines, loading them with the careful attention to detail that separated professional from amateur. Wonder if I'll recognize any landmarks. You'll recognize all of them. Morrison's voice carried certainty. Places where we do extreme things get burned into memory. Geography becomes personal. Every rock means something. You speak from experience? 3 deployments worth. Morrison handed him a radio. There's a hill in Helmand Province I can't forget. Lost 2 soldiers there. Can still see every detail when I close my eyes. You'll carry those mountains forever, Chun. The trick is making peace with the carrying. Chun secured the radio to his vest, testing the fit. How do you make peace with it? By understanding it serve a purpose. Those 2 soldiers I lost, they died protecting civilians during an ambush. Their sacrifice mattered. The place reminds me of loss, but also of meaning. Your mountains are similar. 7 Taliban dead, 1 sergeant saved. The geography holds both violence and purpose. That's almost poetic. 12 years in the army teaches you to find meaning in trauma. Morrison's tone stayed pragmatic. Otherwise, the weight crushes you. You carry it by remembering why it was necessary. Chun finished his equipment check. His gear was ready. His mind was prepared. Tomorrow he'd return to terrain that had nearly killed him, but this time as part of a team with proper support. The contrast was significant. He left the armory and headed toward the operations center, where Hawkins had returned to duty 2 weeks earlier. The sergeant's injuries had healed slower than Chen's, complicated by internal damage that required extended recovery. But he was back now, coordinating logistics and support operations with the same quiet competence that had earned Chen's respect 2 years ago. Hawkins looked up from his computer when Chen entered. "Chun, ready for tomorrow's patrol?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Chen leaned against the desk. "Strange going back there." "I imagine so." Hawkins saved his work, turned to face Chen fully. "You know, I never properly thank you. I mean, I've said the words, but actually expressing what it meant, what you did, I don't think I managed that." "You don't have to." "I do, though." Hawkins' voice was serious. "Michelle and the girls, they have a husband and father because you refused to quit. Because you carried me when carrying me should have been impossible. That's not something you just say thanks for and move on. That's a debt I'll carry forever." "It's not a debt." Chen's voice was firm. "You gave me something before any of this happened. You saw me when I was invisible. Made me believe I could be more than what everyone assumed. What I did in those mountains, that was just returning what you'd already given me." "That's a generous way to frame it." "It's the accurate way." Chen met his eyes. "I was invisible my whole life. To my foster family, to the army, to myself. You changed that with basic decency. Treated me like I mattered. That's worth more than you know." Hawkins was quiet for a moment. "Michelle still wants you to visit when we rotate home. The girls have been asking about you nonstop. They've decided you're their personal superhero." "I'm definitely not a superhero." "Try telling them that." Hawkins smiled. "Fair warning, they're going to interrogate you about every detail. How you climbed the rock wall, how you fought the bad guys, how you carried me through the mountains. I've sanitized the story as much as possible, but they want to hear it from you. I can handle curious kids. These are my kids. They're relentless." Hawkins' smile faded to something more serious. "But actually, I hope you'll do it. Visit, I mean, not just for them, but for you. You've been alone too long, Chun. Carrying too much by yourself. Let someone share the weight. I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Hawkins turned back to his computer. "Stay safe tomorrow. That terrain is treacherous even with proper support." Chun left the operations center and returned to his CHU as evening settled over FOB Zephyr. Tomorrow would be his first official patrol as infantry. His first chance to apply everything he'd learned in a real operation. His first opportunity to prove that his mountain rescue wasn't anomaly, but capability. He spent the evening reviewing maps and intelligence reports. The northeast ridgeline showed increased Taliban activity, probably a new cell moving into the vacuum created when Chun had eliminated 7 fighters 3 months ago. Violence created cascades. Consequences rippled outward. Chen's unauthorized rescue had shifted tactical dynamics in ways analysts were still tracking. The irony of being both cause and solution to a tactical problem wasn't lost on him. He'd created the situation by killing Taliban fighters. Now he'd help address it as authorized infantry. The cycle was almost poetic in its circular logic. Chen pulled out the letter from his foster mother, read it again. David would be proud. The words had become a mantra during difficult moments. A reminder that his transformation mattered beyond tactical outcomes and military recognition. He'd proven to himself that he wasn't the coward who'd let his brother die. Had demonstrated he could be the person who acted instead of hid. The mountains had given him that. The rescue had provided closure he'd been seeking for 6 years. What came next was learning to live with what he'd proven. To be the soldier who could do terrible things when necessary without becoming terrible himself. To integrate Oakland's violence with the Army's discipline. To find balance between capability and humanity. Infantry training had started that process. Tomorrow's patrol would continue it. Eventually, Chen hoped, he'd reach a place where his contradictions felt less like conflict and more like complexity. Where being both analyst and warrior, both thoughtful and violent, both damaged and functional made sense instead of creating constant tension. The next morning, Chun assembled with 2nd Squad as dawn painted the mountains in shades of gold and red. Morrison did final equipment checks, verified radio frequencies, confirmed everyone understood the patrol route and objectives. Standard sector sweep, Morrison said. We're checking for enemy activity, marking positions, gathering intelligence. Rules of engagement are clear. We engage only if engaged first or if we identify imminent threat to coalition forces. Questions? None. The squad was experienced professional. They knew the mission parameters. Chun, you're on point with me. Morrison gestured. Your knowledge of this terrain is valuable. Use it. They moved out through the gate, past the wire, into the Afghan hills that had nearly killed Chun 3 months earlier. The landscape was unchanged. Same rocks, same valleys, same mountains that cared nothing for human drama played out across their slopes. But Chun was different. He moved with a team now instead of alone, had proper equipment and support instead of improvised desperation, operated with authorization instead of defiance. The difference was profound. Instead of carrying the mission alone, the weight was distributed across 8 soldiers. Instead of making every decision in isolation, he had Morrison's experience and the squad's collective capability. Instead of pure survival, he had doctrine and training to guide action. They reached the northeast ridgeline without incident. Chun recognized landmarks. The boulder where he'd hidden from the Taliban patrol. The ravine he'd crossed carrying Hawkins. The cave system where 7 men had died and 1 had been saved. The caves were empty now, abandoned after the firefight. The Taliban smart enough not to reoccupy a compromised position. But the evidence remained. Brass casings, dark stains on stone, the physical record of violence that had changed everything. Hold position, Morrison said quietly. Chin, what's your assessment? Chin studied the terrain with analyst's eyes and warrior's instinct. The cave mouth provided excellent cover, but limited escape routes. High ground overlooked the approach. Movement in the area would be visible from multiple directions. It's defensible but exposed, Chin said. Good for temporary staging, poor for sustained operations. Taliban would use it as waypoint, not base. They'd move through, resupply, continue to more secure positions. Agreed. Morrison marked the location on his map. We'll note it for surveillance. Keep moving. The patrol continued through familiar territory. Chun guided them along routes he'd memorized during 2 years of satellite analysis and 1 desperate night of survival. He showed them approaches, weak points, locations where ambush was likely. His knowledge proved valuable. The squad avoided 3 potential danger zones Chun identified. They marked Taliban movement signs Morrison might have missed. They gathered intelligence that would help future operations. By the time they returned to base 6 hours later, Chun had proven his worth beyond his rescue operation. He wasn't just the analyst who'd gone rogue. He was a capable infantry soldier with unique skills that enhanced team effectiveness. Good work today, Morrison said as they secured equipment. Your terrain knowledge made a significant difference. Keep that up. Will do. Chun reported to Okonkwo for debrief. She listened to his observations, asked pointed questions, incorporated his intelligence into operational planning, treated him as the professional soldier he'd become instead of the anomaly he'd been. If you enjoyed the story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you've had a similar situation happen to you before. That evening, Chun sat outside his CHU and watched the sun set over the mountains. The same mountains where he'd nearly died, where he'd killed 7 men, where he'd proven he could be the person his brother would have been proud of. The weight was still there, probably always would be. 7 lives taken, 1 life saved, damaged knee, bronze star, letter of reprimand, complex reputation, all the pieces of what he'd done and who he'd become. But the weight felt different now, shared instead of carried alone, meaningful instead of just heavy. Part of a larger story about transformation and redemption instead of isolated trauma. Chin's phone buzzed. A message from Hawkins. Michelle confirmed dinner plans for next month when we're stateside. The girls are already planning what questions to ask you. Hope you're ready. Chun smiled, typed back a response. Ready as I'll ever be. Looking forward to it. He sent the message and pocketed the phone. Next month seemed distant, but it represented something important. Connection, family, the chance to be more than his military role, to matter to people beyond his tactical utility. For now, though, Chun had patrol rotation, had infantry duties, had a team depending on his knowledge and capability, had a purpose that integrated all his contradictions into something functional. The analyst who'd become a warrior, the fighter who'd learned discipline, the coward who'd become brave, the broken person who'd found a way to be whole. Chun stood, tested his leg, felt it hold despite the ache. Tomorrow meant more training, more patrols, more opportunities to prove that his mountain rescue wasn't an anomaly, but foundation for the soldier he'd become. The stars emerged above the Afghan peaks, the same stars that had witnessed impossible choices and unlikely survival. They offered no judgment, no answers, only the patient observation of ancient light watching brief human drama. Chun headed inside, ready for whatever came next, because he'd learned something in those mountains that no amount of training could teach. That the person you become is shaped by the choices you make when everything is on the line. When comfort and safety are options, and you choose courage anyway. He'd made that choice once, proven he could be that person. Now, he just had to keep being that person, day after day, patrol after patrol, until it stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like identity. Chin closed his eyes and slept without nightmares for the first time in 3 months. The mountains had taken much, but given more. The cost had been real, but the transformation was worth it. He was home, not the building, not the base, but the person inside. Finally at peace with who he'd been and who he'd become. Finally able to carry the weight without it crushing him. Finally whole.